Hey guys, just want to say thanks for tuning in today. Smash that subscribe button if you're new here, and as always, please like this video if you enjoy the stories. Now, let's get into the stories.
I still have the screenshots from that night because every once in a while I go back and read the messages just to make sure I didn't imagine any of it. The weird part is how normal it started. Nothing about the profile stood out. No creepy bio, no strange photos, nothing that screamed danger. Just a girl sitting on a couch with a small brown dog in her lap and a caption about being bored and wanting someone to hang out with. The first message was basic. A match, a couple dumb jokes, the usual back and forth people do when they both know they're just killing time on an app. She seemed chill, the kind of person who replies fast but not in a weird way. The dog in her pictures showed up in a few of them, always sitting next to her like it was glued there. She mentioned early on that the dog couldn't be left alone long because it would tear the place apart. I didn't think much about that at the time. After maybe an hour of messaging, she suggested meeting up that same night. That alone should have been a red flag, but honestly, I was bored, and it was a Friday. The only condition she kept bringing up was that it had to be at her apartment because of the dog. She kept repeating that she couldn't leave it alone. I remember thinking that was kind of funny because the dog looked like it weighed maybe 10 pounds. The address she sent was across town in an older part of the city. Not dangerous or anything, just one of those areas where all the buildings look like they were built in the 80s and never updated. Flat concrete walls, long balconies, dim parking lots. The kind of place where every hallway smells like old carpet. I almost canceled halfway there because the drive felt way longer than I expected. It was late, the streets were empty, and my phone signal kept dropping. But I had already told her I was on the way, and I'm the kind of person who hates backing out once something is set. When I got there, the building looked exactly like I imagined. 4 floors, yellow lights in the stairwells, and a parking lot that only had a few cars scattered around. Her apartment number was on the 3rd floor. The dog started barking before I'd even knocked. Small, sharp barks that echo through the hallway. A second later, the door opened, and she was standing there holding the dog against her chest like it was a baby. She looked exactly like the photos. Same dark hair, same hoodie, same little dog. Nothing weird about her at all. If anything, she looked kind of tired, like someone who stayed up too late watching videos. The apartment looked normal too. Small living room, couch against the wall, Tim playing something random. The only strange thing I noticed at first was that the place was extremely clean. Not just tidy, but like someone had wiped every surface 5 minutes earlier. Even the kitchen counters looked almost shiny. The dog calmed down after a minute and started sniffing my shoes. She set it on the floor, and it followed her around like a shadow while she grabbed drinks from the fridge. For the first half hour, everything felt completely normal. We sat on the couch, watched random videos, scrolled through our phones. She seemed relaxed. The kind of person who laughs quietly at stuff on her screen. If someone told me to describe the vibe of that room at that point, I would have said boring but comfortable. The first weird moment happened when she started asking questions about where I worked and what my schedule looked like during the week. Not just casual questions either, really specific ones. What time I usually left work, what time I'm at home, if anyone expected me to be somewhere certain days. At first, I thought she was just making conversation. People ask that stuff all the time, but she kept circling back to it, like she was building a timeline in her head. Then she asked something that made my brain pause for a second. She asked if I would be willing to help her test an alibi for the next night. Not in a joking way either. She said it casually while sitting there scrolling through her phone like it was the most normal request in the world. I remember laughing at first because I thought it was some kind of dark joke, like those weird hypotheticals people throw out when they're bored. But she kept explaining. The idea she laid out was simple. She wanted to see if it would sound believable to someone if she said she had spent the next evening with me. She started describing what we would supposedly do, what time I would arrive, what time I would leave, even which restaurant we would claim to have ordered food from. The whole time she said it like she was planning a group project. I started getting this weird tight feeling in my chest because the way she described everything was way too detailed. She even talked about how long the food delivery would take so the timeline sounded realistic. The dog was sitting on the floor staring up at her while she went through all of this like it had heard the speech before. I tried to play it off like she was messing with me, but she kept adding more pieces to the plan. She mentioned that if anyone asked, we would say we watched a movie around 9. She had already picked the movie. And that's when I noticed something else strange about the apartment. There were almost no personal items anywhere. No photos on the walls, no mail on the counters, no random stuff people usually leave lying around. It looked like someone had moved in that day or was about to move out. While she was still talking, I got up and walked toward the kitchen pretending I wanted more water. That's when I saw the back door. It was slightly open and the outside light was on. I remember staring at the door for a second because something about it didn't sit right. If the dog couldn't be left alone like she said, why was the door open like that? When I looked outside, I saw the edge of the small balcony and something dark leaning against the railing. At first, I thought it was a rolled-up rug. Then my brain slowly realized it looked more like a big plastic storage bin standing upright. I turned back toward the living room and she was watching me. Not smiling or anything, just watching. She started talking again about the alibi thing and mentioned that it was important for her to know if I would stick to the story if someone asked questions later. That line made everything feel 10 times heavier. Because people don't worry about someone asking questions later unless they already know something's going to happen. I started noticing more small things after that. The smell of cleaning chemicals in the air, the empty trash can in the kitchen like someone had just taken the bag out, the way she kept glancing at the clock on the wall. The dog walked over to the back door and scratched at it like it wanted to go outside. She stood up and followed it. I watched from the couch as she stepped onto the balcony for a second. When she moved aside, the light hit the plastic bin fully and I saw dark streaks running down one side of it. Not fresh or dripping, just dried marks that looked like they had been wiped. She came back inside and closed the door behind her. Then she started explaining another part of the timeline. In her version of the story, I was supposed to arrive at her place around 7 the next night and stay until almost midnight. The problem with that plan was that I was already there now. And she had clearly been preparing the apartment for something before I even showed up. That realization hit me so hard I felt dizzy. I grabbed my phone and pretended to check a message. Then I told her I had to leave soon because I had an early shift in the morning. She looked disappointed but not surprised, like she expected that reaction. As I walked to the door, she reminded me about the alibi again and said it would really help her out. I nodded like I was considering it and stepped into the hallway. The second the door closed behind me, I felt the tension drain out of my body so fast my hands started shaking. I didn't even wait for the elevator. I ran down the stairs 3 at a time and got to my car as fast as possible. While I was backing out of the parking lot, I looked up at the 3rd floor balcony. She was standing out there holding the dog and watching the lot. The plastic bin was still behind her near the railing. I never answered any of her messages after that night. She sent a few asking if I had thought about the alibi idea. Then the profile disappeared a couple days later. Sometimes I wonder what was supposed to happen the next night. And sometimes I wonder if the only reason it didn't happen is because I showed up a day too early. The first weird thing about that night didn't seem weird at all until later. That's the part that still bothers me when I think about it. Nothing looked off at the start. If someone watched the whole evening from across the room, they would probably say it looked like a normal first date. 2 people talking, eating cheap food, walking around the city. The kind of night that happens every single day. But if you rewind the night and watch closely, you start noticing small things that don't fit right. Little moments where he looked down at his phone longer than he should have. Quick glances at the screen that lasted just a second too long. And the worst part is that at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I almost didn't go on the date at all. It was one of those weeks where everything felt slow and boring. My friends were busy, my job schedule had been weird, and I kept opening Tinder out of habit just to scroll for a few minutes. Most of the matches were the usual stuff. People who barely replied or sent one message and disappeared. Then I matched with him. His profile looked normal. Maybe even a little better than normal. Clean photos, simple bio, nothing try hard. One picture of him standing near a lake, another sitting in a coffee shop, one with a dog that looked way too big for the tiny couch it was laying on. He started the conversation with something basic about my profile picture. Nothing cringe, nothing strange, just normal messages. The kind that make you think someone is actually paying attention instead of copying the same line to everyone. After a couple of days of messaging, he suggested meeting up at this small food hall near the train station. It was one of those places with a bunch of food stalls and long wooden tables where everyone sits together. Busy but not loud. I remember thinking it was a good choice because it felt public and safe. Not a bar, not some quiet restaurant in the corner of town. When I got there, he was already sitting at one of the tables with 2 drinks. He stood up when I walked over like someone who had good manners drilled into them growing up. That was my first impression of him. Polite. Calm. Kind of quiet, but not awkward. The date started exactly how you would expect. Small talk about work, school, random things we both saw online that week. He listened when I talked and actually remembered things I had mentioned in our messages earlier. That alone made him seem better than most of the people I had met through apps. The only thing that stood out a little was how often he checked his phone. It wasn't constant, just frequent enough that I noticed it after a while. Every few minutes his screen would light up, and he would glance down quickly. Sometimes he typed something fast before putting the phone face down again. I assumed it was work or a group chat or something. Everyone checks their phone these days. I didn't think it meant anything. After we finished eating, we walked outside because the weather was still warm. The area around the station had this long row of lights hanging above the sidewalk and people walking everywhere. Street performers, late-night shops, all that stuff. He seemed relaxed the whole time. He asked about where I grew up, what kind of places I wanted to travel to, what shows I liked watching late at night when I couldn't sleep. Normal questions, easy to answer. Every once in a while his phone would buzz and he would check it again. At one point we stopped near a dessert stall that sold ice cream and waffles. While we were waiting in line, I saw him typing on his phone again. The screen was angled away so I couldn't see much, but I noticed a page with dark colors and a bunch of small text boxes stacked on top of each other like comments. It looked like a forum. He put the phone away quickly when he noticed me looking. I didn't think much about it then. A lot of people still use forums for random hobbies. Gaming, sports, whatever. We walked around for another hour after that. The night was pretty relaxed. There were a few moments where things felt slightly awkward, but that's normal for a first date. Nothing about it made me feel unsafe. Looking back now, the most unsettling part was how normal he acted. Like he had done the same routine many times before. Eventually, we ended up sitting on a bench near the river that ran behind the train station. The water reflected the lights from the buildings, and there were a few other people around talking quietly. That's when his phone buzzed again. This time it buzzed multiple times in a row. He looked down and actually smiled at the screen for a second before typing something quickly. He set the phone down next to him on the bench after that. A minute later, the screen lit up again. I glanced down without thinking, and that's when I saw the page clearly. It was definitely a forum. Dark background, white text, long thread of comments. At the top of the page was a title that made my brain stop for a second. The title had my name in it. Not my full name, just the first name from my Tinder profile followed by something about a date progress update. For a second, I thought it had to be something else. Maybe someone with the same name. Maybe some weird coincidence. But then I saw the next line under the title. It said something about the girl sitting across from him near the river. My stomach dropped immediately. I leaned a little closer to the phone and saw more lines of text underneath. Short messages posted every few minutes. One mentioned that we had ordered food earlier. Another mentioned the ice cream stall. Another one said we were walking near the river now. Each post had replies underneath it from different usernames. Most of the replies were short, a few words, sometimes just numbers. But then I saw one comment that made the whole situation clear. Someone had posted a number followed by the word dollars. Underneath it, another person had posted a higher number with the same word. They were betting. More comments kept appearing while I was looking at the screen. Some of them were guessing whether the date would end with me going back to his place. Others were asking for updates. I felt this heavy wave of confusion and anger at the same time, like my brain was trying to process 10 things at once. I realized that every time he had checked his phone earlier, he was probably posting updates about what was happening. Where we were sitting, what we were eating, how the date was going. All of it being watched by random people online placing bets. I sat back slowly and looked at him. He was staring out at the water like nothing unusual had happened. His phone buzzed again next to him. Another comment appeared on the screen. This one asked if I seemed interested or if the odds should drop. That's when he noticed me looking at the phone again. His face changed immediately. Not panicked exactly, just annoyed that I had seen it. He grabbed the phone quickly and locked the screen. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The noise from the train station carried across the water and people walked past behind us like nothing strange was happening. I stood up and told him I needed to head home. He didn't argue or try to stop me. He just nodded like the date had ended normally. The walk back to my car felt longer than it should have. My phone buzzed once while I was crossing the street. It was a message request from a username I didn't recognize. The message said something about the thread being closed early and a lot of people losing money. I blocked the account without replying. Later that night, I opened Tinder again out of curiosity. His profile was already gone. The strange part about that night didn't start underground. It started earlier when my phone buzzed with a message that sounded way more interesting than the usual boring first date plans. Most people on Tinder want to meet for coffee or drinks somewhere loud. That's fine, but it always feels the same. Same conversations, same awkward sitting across a table pretending to be more interesting than you really are. This one was different right away. He told me there was a secret underground party happening that night and he could bring a guest. He said it like it was something normal but also kind of rare. Not some big club event or anything public. Something smaller that people usually hear about through friends. I almost ignored it because it sounded a little dramatic, but he didn't seem like the type who was trying too hard. His profile looked simple. Regular photos, regular job. Nothing that screamed weird. So I asked a few questions about the party. He said it was under an old building downtown. Music, drinks, people hanging out. Nothing illegal or dangerous, just private. The way he described it made it sound like something you would only hear about if you knew the right people. I was bored that night anyway, so I agreed to go. We met outside a coffee shop a few blocks from the downtown area. He was already standing near the entrance when I got there, leaning against the wall looking down at his phone. He looked like his pictures. Tall, dark hair, simple jacket, calm personality. When he looked up, he smiled like someone who was used to meeting new people. The conversation started easily while we walked. We talked about random stuff at first. Where we grew up, what we did during the week, things we watched online when we couldn't sleep, the usual first date topics. Nothing about him seemed strange. After about 10 minutes of walking, we turned into a quieter street where most of the shops were already closed. The lights were dim, and the sidewalks were mostly empty. He pointed toward an old brick building at the end of the block. The place looked abandoned from the outside. Faded sign above the door, dusty windows, metal gate halfway pulled down. If someone told me the building had been empty for years, I would have believed it instantly. He walked right up to the door and knocked 3 times. A few seconds later, someone inside opened it just enough for us to slip through. The inside looked completely different from the outside. There were lights on in the hallway and music echoing faintly from somewhere below. Not loud club music, just bass and voices mixed together. The person who opened the door nodded at him like they already knew each other. They barely looked at me. We walked down a narrow hallway that smelled like old concrete and cleaning supplies. At the end, there was a staircase going down. The music got louder as we went lower. When we reached the bottom, it opened into a huge basement room that had clearly been renovated at some point. Colored lights on the ceiling, couches pushed against the walls, a long table with drinks and snacks. Maybe 30 people were already there. Most of them looked around our age. Groups talking, people sitting on the couches, others standing near the music. At first, everything looked normal. Then something happened that made the whole situation feel wrong immediately. The first person who noticed us walking in smiled and waved like they recognized me. Not him. Me. I thought maybe they had mistaken me for someone else, but then another person across the room did the same thing. Then another. Within the first minute of being there, 4 or 5 different people greeted me like they already knew who I was. Not in a super excited way, just casual recognition, like someone spotting a familiar face at a party. My brain started trying to figure out if maybe I had met these people somewhere before. Maybe through friends or school or work. But none of them looked familiar. The guy I came with didn't react at all. He just walked further into the room like everything was normal. Someone near the couch came over holding a drink and nodded at me with this weird knowing look. I tried to act relaxed even though the whole thing was confusing. A few minutes later, we sat down near the wall where the music was quieter. He grabbed drinks for both of us while I looked around the room. That's when I noticed people glancing over at me more than usual. Not staring exactly, just quick looks followed by small smiles or nods. It made me feel like I had walked into the middle of something I didn't understand. While I was trying to figure it out, a girl with short hair walked over carrying a thin folder in one hand. She handed it directly to me. No explanation. Just placed it in my hands like it belonged to me. The folder was plain and slightly bent like it had been carried around for a while. I opened it without thinking. The first page had my name on it. My full name. Underneath it was a list of basic information. My age, the city I live in, the college I went to for 2 years before dropping out. I froze for a second because none of that information was on my Tinder profile. I turned the page. The next sheet had a list of previous addresses going back almost 5 years. One of them was the small apartment I lived in when I first moved to the city, a place I barely even talk about anymore. Another page had screenshots of social media posts. Photos I had posted months earlier. Even one from a small birthday dinner my friend threw last year. I felt this heavy pressure in my chest while flipping through the pages. There were notes written next to some of the pictures. Small observations about where I was, who I was with, what restaurant it looked like. Like someone had been tracking my life piece by piece. I looked up from the folder and noticed a few people across the room watching me carefully. Not smiling anymore. Just waiting. The guy I came with sat down next to me again like nothing unusual was happening. He took a sip from his drink and looked around the room calmly. I looked back down at the folder. The last page was the worst one. It had a photo of me walking out of my apartment building 3 weeks earlier. The angle looked like it had been taken from across the street. I don't remember anyone standing there that day. When I lifted my head again, the girl who handed me the folder was still standing nearby. She looked like she was waiting for a reaction. I closed the folder slowly and set it on my lap. The music kept playing in the background. People talking, glasses clinking, normal party sounds. But the way they kept glancing at me made it feel like I was the only reason the party existed. After a few minutes, I stood up and told the guy I needed some air. He didn't argue. He just nodded and pointed toward the staircase we came down earlier. I walked up the stairs as calmly as I could while my heart was beating way too fast. The hallway above felt quieter and colder than before. I pushed through the front door and stepped back onto the street. The night air felt completely different after being underground for that long. I walked 2 blocks before stopping. The folder was still in my hands. I opened it one more time under a streetlight. The pages were exactly the same as before. My name, my photos, my addresses. On the inside of the back cover, there was a small line written in pen. It said profile confirmed. I left the folder in a trash can near the bus stop and went home. The next morning, I opened Tinder out of curiosity. His profile was gone. I still think about that basement sometimes and wonder how long those people had been watching me before that night. I didn't think anything strange was going to happen that night. Honestly, the only reason I even remember the exact day is because of how normal it felt at the start. The weather was warm, my phone battery was almost dead, and I almost canceled the date because I was tired from work. If I had stayed home that night, none of this would even be a memory, but I didn't cancel. I matched with him 3 days earlier. His profile looked simple and kind of boring in a good way. A few photos outside, one in a kitchen holding a pan, and another sitting on a balcony with a city view behind him. His bio mentioned that he liked cooking and trying new recipes on weekends. That lie is what started the whole conversation. I had written in my own bio that I liked trying random food places and learning simple recipes because I was tired of eating frozen meals all the time. It wasn't anything deep, just a sentence I typed quickly when I made the profile. He messaged me about it right away. He said he liked when people actually mentioned normal hobbies instead of just posting jokes or random quotes. The conversation stayed easy after that. Nothing strange. He talked about cooking pasta dishes and trying to perfect a few sauces he had learned from a friend. I told him I could barely cook anything without following a video. After a couple days, he suggested making dinner at his house. Normally, I don't go to someone's house that quickly, but the way he described it sounded relaxed. He said it would just be cooking, eating, and watching something afterward. It felt casual. His house was in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city. Not a huge place, just a small single-story home with a driveway and a little porch light near the door. When I got there, he opened the door before I'd even knocked. Like he had been watching the driveway. He looked exactly like his photos. Tall, clean clothes, calm voice. The kind of person who makes a place feel organized just by standing there. The inside of the house looked really neat. Not messy at all. The kitchen counters were spotless, and everything looked arranged carefully. Spices lined up in a rack, pans hanging above the stove, cutting boards stacked against the wall. It honestly looked like the kitchen of someone who actually enjoyed cooking. He started preparing dinner almost immediately, chopping vegetables, heating a pan, adding ingredients while explaining what he was making. I sat at the counter watching for a while. The whole thing felt kind of relaxing. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the kitchen, and the sound of something simmering on the stove made the place feel warm and normal. For the first hour, nothing strange happened. We talked about school, work, random shows on streaming services. Every once in a while, he would step into the pantry to grab something or check the oven. After a while, I offered to help, but he said he liked doing it himself because it kept the recipe consistent. So I just sat there scrolling my phone and watching him cook. At one point, he said he needed to grab something from the garage and stepped out through the back door. The moment he left, the kitchen felt very quiet. The stove was still bubbling slowly, and the overhead light hummed faintly. I walked around the kitchen for a minute just looking at things. There were a lot of drawers and cabinets, all of them closed neatly. I don't even know why I started opening them. Maybe curiosity, maybe boredom. The first drawer had utensils, forks, knives, spoons lined up perfectly in little sections. The second drawer had cooking tools, spatulas, peelers, measuring cups. The third drawer had random kitchen stuff like aluminum foil and plastic wrap. Everything looked normal. Then I opened the drawer closest to the end of the counter. This one was deeper than the others. Inside was a stack of small plastic cards. At first I thought they were gift cards or something similar, but when I picked one up I realized it was an ID, a driver license. It belonged to a woman. Different name than mine, different face, different birth date. I stared at it for a second trying to understand why it would be in a kitchen drawer. Then I noticed there were more underneath it. I lifted the stack slightly and saw maybe 10 or 12 IDs all piled together. Every single one belonged to a different woman. Different photos, different names. My heart started beating faster while I looked through them. Some of the cards looked newer than others. A few had small scratches like they had been used for years. I started flipping them over one by one. That's when I noticed something else sitting underneath the stack. Small printed sheets of paper. Each sheet looked like a screenshot of a Tinder profile. Profile photo at the top. Bio underneath. I pulled one out and looked at it. The bio had a short sentence about liking random food places and learning simple recipes. The exact same sentence that was on my profile. My stomach dropped instantly. I grabbed another sheet from the stack. Different woman in the photo. Same bio. Another sheet. Another woman. Same bio again. It was word for word identical to mine. Every page looked like a copy of the same profile description attached to different faces. My brain started racing trying to figure out what I was looking at. Maybe these were profiles he had matched with before. Maybe he collected screenshots for some weird reason. But then I realized something worse. Some of the IDs in the drawer matched the faces in those screenshots. The cards and the profiles lined up. Real women. Real identities. All connected by the exact same Tinder bio. The back door opened suddenly and I jumped a little. He walked back into the kitchen carrying a small bag from the garage. I pushed the drawer closed quickly and stepped back to the counter. He didn't seem to notice anything at first. He just went back to the stove and started stirring the pan like nothing had happened. I stood there trying to act normal while my mind kept replaying the stack of IDs in that drawer. After a few minutes, he set 2 plates on the counter and served the food. It smelled good, but my appetite was completely gone. I forced myself to take a few bites while thinking about how to leave without making it obvious something was wrong. The whole time he talked casually about the recipe and how long it took him to learn it. I nodded and pretended to listen. Eventually, I told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to head home early. He looked slightly disappointed but didn't argue. He walked me to the front door and thanked me for coming over. The moment I got to my car, I locked the doors and sat there for a minute trying to process everything. The stack of IDs. The screenshots. The identical bios. Later that night, I opened Tinder and read through my own profile again. That short line about food and recipes suddenly felt like something I shouldn't have written at all. I deleted the account the same night. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me, and I searched his name online. I didn't find much. Just a few social media accounts that hadn't been updated in years. But one thing stuck in my mind. If he had that many IDs in the drawer already, then there had to be more people who sat at that same kitchen counter before me. And some of them probably had the same bio too. The first time she said I looked familiar, I thought it was just one of those things people say when they're trying to start a conversation. It happens all the time. Someone swears they've seen you somewhere before, you both try to guess where, and eventually you laugh about it and move on. That's exactly how it started. If she hadn't brought it up again later, the whole night would have been completely forgettable. I matched with her on Tinder on a random Sunday afternoon while I was laying on my couch doing nothing. I wasn't even planning on going out that week. I was just swiping out of boredom while watching random videos on my phone. Her profile stood out because she looked normal in a way that felt rare on those apps. No heavy filters, no weird poses, just photos of her sitting at a park bench, holding a coffee, and one picture of her standing near a lake somewhere. Her bio was short, something about liking quiet restaurants and late-night drives when the city was empty. I messaged her about the lake photo because it looked like a place I had visited once on a road trip. That's how the conversation started. She replied pretty quickly and said she wasn't even sure where the photo was taken because a friend had dragged her there. After that, the messages went back and forth easily. Nothing weird in the conversation. After 2 days, we decided to meet for dinner at this small restaurant near the edge of downtown. The place was one of those quiet spots that doesn't have loud music or huge crowds. Mostly people sitting at tables talking while the lights stay dim. When I got there, she was already sitting at a table near the window. She looked exactly like her photos. Dark hair pulled back, simple jacket, and one of those relaxed expressions that makes someone seem easy to talk to. The moment I sat down, she looked at me for a second longer than expected. Not in a rude way, just like she was studying my face. Then she smiled slightly and said I looked familiar. I laughed and told her people say that to me sometimes. That seemed to settle it for a moment. The waiter came over and we ordered food. The place had a quiet atmosphere and the lights outside reflected through the windows onto the table. For the first half hour, the conversation went smoothly. We talked about work, family, random things we had seen online recently. She seemed comfortable and relaxed, the kind of person who listens carefully and doesn't interrupt. But every once in a while she would pause and look at me again like she was trying to remember something. Not staring exactly, just studying my face for a second. The second time she mentioned it happened when the food arrived. She looked at me again and said the same thing, that I looked very familiar. This time she sounded more serious about it. I joked that maybe we had passed each other somewhere in the city before. It's not a huge place, but it's big enough for random overlaps. She nodded slowly, but still looked unsure. After that, we kept talking about other things. Movies, travel, stupid stories from work. The normal stuff that fills time during a first date. About halfway through dinner, she got up to use the restroom. While she was gone, I looked around the restaurant for a minute. There were only a few other tables filled. A couple sitting near the bar, two people talking quietly in the corner. Everything felt calm. When she came back, something about her expression looked different. She sat down slowly and stared at me again. This time she didn't smile. She just kept looking at my face like a puzzle she was finally starting to solve. I asked if everything was okay. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. For a few seconds, she scrolled through something on the screen while glancing up at me every few seconds. My stomach started feeling a little tight because the way she was looking at me didn't feel normal anymore. Then her face went pale. Not slow change either. 1 second she looked focused, and the next second all the color drained out of her face like someone had flipped a switch. She put the phone down on the table and stared at me. That's when she said the sentence that made the entire night stop feeling real. She said I was a guy from the missing persons poster. For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. The way she said it didn't sound like a joke, though. Her voice sounded confused and slightly scared at the same time. I laughed awkwardly and asked what she meant. She turned her phone around and slid across the table. On the screen was a photo of a poster taped to a street pole. The kind of poster people put up when someone disappears. White background, big photo in the middle, contact number at the bottom. The photo looked like me. Same hair, same face, same expression. It was clearly taken from a distance, like someone had snapped it without the person noticing. Under the photo were a few lines of text describing a missing person. The name on the poster wasn't mine, but the face definitely looked like me. I stared at the screen for a long time trying to process it. She explained that she had seen the poster a few weeks earlier near the train station where she usually parked her car. She said the face stuck in her memory because something about it looked familiar even back then. That's why she kept thinking she recognized me. While she was in the restroom earlier, she searched online to see if she could find the poster again. And she did. The image she showed me was from a local community page where people shared alerts about missing people. The post had comments underneath it from people saying they had seen the poster around the city. Some of the comments were recent. I kept staring at the photo on the screen. The longer I looked at it, the stranger it felt. It wasn't just similar. It was basically my face. But the name under the picture was completely different. She asked if I had a brother or someone in my family who looked like me. I told her no. She asked if maybe someone had used my photo somewhere online. I had no idea. The entire situation felt unreal, sitting there in the middle of a quiet restaurant while plates of food sat untouched on the table. Eventually, she opened the original post and zoomed in on the photo. There was a small detail in the background that made my stomach drop. The photo had been taken on a street corner I walked past almost every day on my way to work. The angle looked like it came from the other side of the road, like someone had been standing there watching. The post said the person had been missing for 3 weeks. I tried to think back through the last few weeks of my life, but nothing unusual came to mind. No strange encounters. No one following me that I noticed. Just normal routines. Work, home, errands. She kept looking at the phone and then back at me. The fear in her face made the whole thing feel worse. Eventually, I told her I needed to go home and think about it. She nodded, but still looked unsettled. We paid for the food and walked outside together. The street was quiet with only a few cars passing by. Before we separated, she looked at me one last time like she was still trying to figure something out. When I got home that night, I searched for the poster myself. It took a while, but I eventually found the same community post she had shown me. The image was still there. Same photo. Same name that wasn't mine. But when I looked closer at the picture, something felt even stranger. The clothes the person was wearing in the photo looked exactly like the jacket I was wearing that night. The same one. I don't know who took that photo. And I don't know why there's a missing poster with my face on it. But a few days after that dinner, I walked past the street corner where the picture was taken. The pole where the posters used to be was empty. Every single one had been removed. There was something strange about him before we even met, but it was a kind of strange that's easy to ignore when you're scrolling through dating apps late at night. Tinder is full of people with odd habits and weird schedules. So when someone says they only meet at night, it doesn't immediately sound like a warning sign. It just sounds like someone who works late or likes quiet places. That's what I thought at first. Looking back now, the signs were right there in the messages. I matched with him on a Monday night while I was laying in bed half asleep. I almost swiped past his profile because the photos were kind of plain. Just him standing in a parking lot in one picture, sitting at a table outside a diner in another. No big group photos, no flashy stuff. His bio was short too. Something about liking quiet drives and late food spots that stay open after midnight. He messaged me first not long after we matched. The conversation started normally. Basic questions about where I worked and what part of the city I live in. Nothing too personal. He typed in short sentences but replied quickly. After maybe 20 minutes, he asked if I liked late night dates. I said it depended on the place. That's when he mentioned he preferred meeting after dark because the city felt calmer then. Less traffic, fewer crowds, more relaxed. It sounded reasonable. We talked a little more over the next 2 days and eventually decided to meet on Friday night. He suggested a small food stand that stayed open until 2 in the morning. I looked it up and saw it was near an old industrial area where there were a few late-night places for truck drivers and people getting off work. The plan was simple. Meet there around midnight. Friday night came and I drove out there around 11:45. The streets in that area were quiet except for a few trucks passing through. The food stand had a bright light above the window and two plastic tables outside. The rest of the street was pretty dark. He was already standing near the corner when I pulled in. I recognized him right away from the photos. Tall, dark jacket, hands in his pockets like he had been waiting there a while. When I walked over, he smiled and nodded like someone who didn't waste time on small talk. The first thing I noticed was how often he looked around the street while we were ordering food. Not in a nervous way exactly, more like someone checking their surroundings out of habit. We grabbed food and sat at one of the plastic tables under the light. The conversation started off normal. He talked about working long hours and how he liked driving around at night to clear his head. He asked about my job and what kind of places I usually went to on weekends. While we were talking, a car pulled into the lot across the street and parked near a convenience store. He noticed it immediately. His eyes followed the car for a few seconds before he looked back at me. I didn't think much about it then. After we finished eating, he suggested walking a little down the road where there was a quieter spot near an empty warehouse. I asked if there were any other places over nearby, but he said most of them had cameras everywhere and it made the place feel crowded. That comment stuck in my head for a second. I didn't say anything about it though. We walked down a sidewalk past a few closed buildings. The street lights were spaced far apart, so parts of the road were darker than others. The warehouse he mentioned had a small parking lot and a chain link fence around it. We stood near the edge of the lot talking while a distant train moved slowly along the tracks behind the buildings. That's when I started noticing something else. Every time we walked past a building with a camera mounted near the door, he would slightly adjust where he was standing. Once he even stepped back into the shadows when a camera was pointed toward the sidewalk. At first I thought maybe he was just aware of them. But after the fourth or fifth time it started feeling deliberate. I asked him casually why he kept avoiding the cameras. He paused for a second before answering. Then he told me he preferred staying off the record for a while. I asked what that meant. He explained it in a calm voice like it wasn't a big deal. He said he had a trial coming up soon, and it was better if he didn't appear on any security footage until everything was finished. My brain took a second to process that sentence. I asked what the trial was about. He shrugged slightly and said it was complicated and his lawyer advised him to keep things quiet until it was over. The way he said it made it sound like a small legal issue. But the fact that he was actively avoiding cameras made it feel like something much bigger. The conversation got quieter after that. I started noticing more details about his behavior. The way he kept scanning the street every few minutes. The way he positioned himself where the lights didn't hit his face directly. After a while, he suggested going for a short drive since the area was getting cold. I agreed mostly because I wanted to leave the empty street. His car was parked a block away behind an old repair shop. It was a dark sedan with tinted windows. When we got inside, he turned on the engine but didn't start driving right away. Instead, he checked the mirrors carefully and looked down the road both directions. Then he pulled out slowly. We drove through several streets that got quieter the further we went. Most of the buildings were warehouses or storage units with big metal doors. Every once in a while we passed a building with a bright security camera mounted near the entrance. Each time that happened he changed streets. Not dramatically. Just small turns that kept the car away from those areas. I finally asked him directly what the trial was about. He didn't answer right away. The car rolled slowly through another empty street before he spoke again. He said the case involved an incident from last year and the details were still being sorted out. He mentioned that his lawyer said staying out of recorded places was the safest option until the trial date passed. I asked what kind of incident required avoiding cameras. He glanced at me for a second before looking back at the road. Then he said it was related to someone who had gone missing. My stomach felt heavy hearing that. The rest of the drive felt much longer than it probably was. We eventually circled back toward the main road where my car was parked. He stopped a short distance away from the food stand and let me out near the corner. Before I got out, he reminded me that he preferred keeping the night private. I nodded and stepped onto the sidewalk. His car drove away slowly into the dark street behind the buildings. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a few minutes thinking about everything he said. The trial. The cameras. The missing person. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched local news reports about upcoming trials in the area. It didn't take long to find something that made my stomach drop. There was an article about a case scheduled for later that month involving a man accused in connection with a disappearance the previous year. The article included a photo of the suspect. It was him. The same face from the parking lot that night. Same jacket. Same calm expression. According to the article, he had been released temporarily while waiting for the trial. The last line mentioned that investigators believe the missing person had last been seen near an industrial district late at night, the same area where we met. I knew the day was going to be strange before I even left my apartment. Not in a dramatic way, just one of those quiet feelings you get when something about a plan seems slightly off, but you can't explain why. The sky was cloudy, my phone battery kept dropping even though I had just charged it, and the entire plan for the date involved driving out to the woods with someone I had only been messaging for a few days. Normally, I meet people somewhere public first. Coffee shops, restaurants, busy places where there are other people around. That's just common sense. But for some reason, I agreed to go hiking with her instead. Her Tinder profile made it sound like that was basically her whole personality. Every photo showed her outside somewhere, standing near a waterfall, sitting on a fallen tree, holding a backpack next to a trail sign. Even her bio talked about spending most weekends exploring new hiking spots. I had written on my profile that I liked being outside too, even though I barely went hiking more than a few times a year. I guess that's what caught her attention. She messaged me first saying she knew a trail about 40 minutes outside the city that most people didn't know about. She said it was quiet and peaceful, and that the views at the top were worth the walk. The way she described it made it sound relaxing. After 2 days of messaging back and forth, she suggested meeting there early in the afternoon. I remember hesitating before agreeing. Driving into the woods with someone you've never met in person isn't exactly the safest plan, but she seemed normal in the messages, friendly, calm, easy to talk to. So I agreed. The trailhead parking area was small, just a patch of gravel near a wooden sign that listed a few different paths going deeper into the forest. When I pulled in, her car was already there. She was sitting on the hood scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she stood up and waved like we had known each other for years. She looked just like her photos. Dark hair pulled back, hiking boots, a small backpack slung over one shoulder. The forest around the parking area was thick with tall trees that blocked most of the sunlight. It made the place feel quieter than normal outdoor spots. After a quick hello, we started walking down the main trail. At first, the hike felt normal. The path was wide enough for 2 people, and there were small wooden markers nailed to trees every so often showing directions. We talked about basic stuff while walking. Work, hobbies, the usual things people bring up on a first date. She seemed comfortable out there, moving quickly, stepping over roots without even looking down. After about 20 minutes, the main trail split into 2 smaller paths. She took the one on the right without even checking the sign. I followed behind her while the forest slowly got thicker. The further we walked, the quieter everything became. The only sounds were leaves moving in the wind and the occasional crack of a branch under our shoes. At one point, I asked how often people came out here. She said not very often. Something about that answer made the forest feel a little heavier. Another 20 minutes passed before we reached a narrow section of trail that looked barely used. The ground was covered with leaves, and there were no signs anymore. I asked if we were still on the right path. She nodded and said she knew the area well. Eventually, the trail disappeared completely. We stepped over fallen branches and pushed through tall bushes until we reached a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. The ground in the clearing looked uneven, like parts of the soil had been disturbed before. She stopped walking in the middle of it. For a moment, she just stood there looking down at the ground. Then she looked up at me with a strange expression. Not nervous exactly, more like someone thinking carefully about what to say next. She told me there was something she needed help with. At first, I thought she meant moving a heavy rock or clearing part of the trail. But then she pointed to a specific patch of dirt near the edge of the clearing. The soil there looked slightly darker than the rest. She said she buried something there last year and needed help digging it up. The sentence sounded so casual that it took my brain a second to process it. I asked what she meant. She explained it slowly like it was a normal request. Last year, she'd been hiking in the same area and needed to hide something for a while. She didn't have time to deal with it back then, so she buried it and planned to come back later. She said she tried digging it up a few weeks ago, but the ground had hardened and it was difficult alone. That's why she wanted someone to help. The entire explanation felt strange. People don't usually bury random things deep in the woods unless they're hiding them. I asked what exactly was buried there. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Then she said it was just a box with some personal stuff she didn't want anyone finding. That answer didn't make things feel better. Still, curiosity kept me standing there. She pulled a small folding shovel from her backpack and handed it to me. Then she grabbed another one from the side pocket. The fact that she had brought 2 shovels made it clear this was planned from the start. We started digging into the darker patch of soil. The dirt was packed tightly and covered with roots that slowed everything down. Every few minutes we had to pull small rocks out of the hole. After about 10 minutes, the hole was deep enough that the soil color changed slightly. The ground underneath looked older and more compact. She leaned closer and started digging faster. Another few minutes passed before the shovel hit something solid. The sound was dull and hollow. We cleared more dirt away until a flat surface appeared. It looked like the top of a plastic storage bin. My stomach felt heavy the moment I saw it. She brushed dirt off the lid and grabbed the edges. The bin was large and buried deeper than expected. It took both of us pulling on it to lift it out of the hole. The plastic surface was scratched and covered in dry mud. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she opened the lid. Inside were several sealed bags and a small metal box. She stared down at the contents like she was checking something important. I asked what was inside. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled one of the bags out and held it in her hands. The shape inside looked long and heavy. That's when I noticed something else inside the bin. A folded piece of fabric with dark stains along one edge. My chest tightened immediately. She quickly closed the lid again like she didn't want the contents exposed for long. Then she told me we needed to rebury the hole. The way she said it made it sound urgent. I stood there for a second trying to understand what I had just helped dig up. But she had already started shoveling dirt back into the hole where the bin had been. Once the ground was flat again, she placed leaves over the spot to make it look natural. The bin stayed outside the hole next to her backpack. She zipped the bag with the seal items inside and slung it over her shoulder. Then she told me we should head back before it got dark. The walk back through the forest felt completely different from the hike in. Every sound seemed louder. Every step heavier. When we finally reached the parking area, the sky had turned gray and the wind had picked up. She thanked me for the help like it had been a normal favor. Then she got into her car and drove away without looking back. I stood there for a long time staring at the road where she disappeared. A week later, I saw a news report about investigators searching a wooded area outside the city connected to a case from the previous year. The footage showed a clearing that looked very familiar. The ground in the video had been recently disturbed. The camera moved across the area slowly, but the plastic bin we dug up that day wasn't there anymore. The weirdest date I ever went on started with a message that looked normal for about 5 seconds, and then slowly got stranger the more I thought about it. At first, it was just another match on the Tinder. His profile looked pretty average. Mid-20s, short brown hair, a couple photos that looked like they were taken on hikes or at random coffee shops. Nothing flashy. His bio said he studied film and liked people with interesting stories. That already sounded a little try-hard, but whatever. I had matched with way worse. The first thing that stood out was how fast he started asking questions. Not the usual small talk stuff. He skipped right past hobbies and music and went straight into stuff about where I grew up. At the time, I thought maybe he was just trying to keep the chat going. People run out of things to say on apps pretty fast, so I answered some of it without thinking too much. But the questions kept getting oddly specific. He asked what my childhood home looked like. Not just the city or neighborhood, but the actual house. He wanted to know if it was a detached house or part of a row. He asked how many floors it had. Then he asked about the inside layout, like where the stairs were when you walked in the front door. I remember sitting on my bed staring at my phone thinking that was kind of random. I joked about it in my head like maybe the guy secretly worked for a real estate company or something. Still, I kept answering because the conversation was flowing and he seemed friendly enough. He said he liked hearing about how people grew up because it shaped who they became later. That sounded like something a film student might say, so it sort of checked out. After a day of messaging, he suggested meeting in person. We picked a small late-night coffee place near the edge of town. It was the kind of place where students hung out with laptops and nobody cared how long you stayed. I got there a little early and grabbed a seat by the window. When he walked in, I recognized him right away from his photos. Same haircut, same face. Nothing about him looked different or sketchy. If anything, he looked slightly nervous, like someone who didn't go on a lot of dates. The date started normal enough. We ordered drinks and sat across from each other at a small round table. At first, the conversation stayed on regular stuff like school, work, movies. He talked about studying film and said he wanted to make documentaries someday. I thought that was actually kind of cool. Then slowly the questions started drifting back to childhood again. He asked what my street looked like growing up. He asked if there were woods nearby. He asked if the house had a basement or attic. Every time I answered, he seemed really focused, like he was mentally building a picture in his head. At one point, he even asked what my bedroom window faced when I was a kid, street side or backyard. That was the moment it started feeling off. I laughed it off and told him he was asking a lot about my old house. He said something about how early environments shape memory and behavior. He started talking about how people react differently to certain spaces depending on how they grew up. It sounded like psychology mixed with film school talk. Still weird though. Another thing I noticed was that he kept glancing at his phone like he was checking notes. Not texting someone, just looking down for a second and then back up at me. The questions kept stacking up. He asked if I ever stayed home alone a lot as a kid. He asked if my parents worked late. He asked if I used to wander around the house at night when everyone else was asleep. That last one made me pause. I told him sometimes I did when I couldn't sleep, which was true. I used to walk downstairs and get water or watch TV quietly. He nodded like that was exactly the answer he expected. The whole time he wasn't being creepy in an obvious way. His tone stayed calm. But the direction of the conversation felt really narrow, like everything was leading towards some bigger point. At one point, he pulled a small notebook out of his backpack and wrote something down. I remember staring at it thinking this was turning into the strangest first date of my life. He explained he liked to keep notes for film ideas. I asked what kind of documentaries he wanted to make. That's when things got even stranger. He started talking about human behavior in controlled situations. He said most documentaries just record events that are already happening, but he was more interested in creating situations and watching how real people react to them. He said reactions are more honest when someone doesn't know they are part of the study. That sentence sat in my brain for a second. I asked what he meant by that. He leaned back in his chair and studied me like he was trying to measure something. Then he started summarizing everything I had told him earlier about my childhood house. He listed the details almost perfectly. 2 floors, stairs right near the front door, kitchen in the back, window facing the street. I remember feeling weird hearing my own life explained back to me like a checklist. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He explained that certain childhood layouts created predictable patterns in how people move through unfamiliar houses later in life. People who grew up with front-facing stairs and narrow hallways apparently had different instincts about exploring rooms compared to people who grew up in open floor plans. I honestly had no idea if that was real or complete nonsense. But he seemed very serious. He told me he had been working on an independent documentary project where he studied those reactions. The way he described it sounded less like filming interviews and more like running experiments. By this point, I was starting to get uncomfortable. I asked why he needed to know so much about my house specifically. That was when he finally dropped the sentence that still sticks in my head. He told me I was exactly the type of person his documentary experiment needed. No joking tone, just calm and direct. The way he said it made it sound like this whole date had been a screening process. I asked what the experiment actually involved. He explained it slowly, like he was proud of the idea. The project involved bringing participants to an unfamiliar house that had a layout designed to trigger certain childhood memory patterns. Hidden cameras would record how they moved through the space while searching for objects. He said the results would show how early environments affect decision-making under pressure. While he was talking, I noticed something that made it worse. His phone screen lit up for a second, and I saw a floor plan open on it. It wasn't random. The layout looked eerily close to the house I grew up in. He noticed me looking and quickly turned the phone over. Then he casually mentioned that the location for the experiment was already prepared. He had rented an empty property outside town and set everything up there. He talked about it like he was inviting me to check out a cool art project. But the way he kept describing hidden cameras and controlled environments made my brain start flashing warning signs. I started wondering how many other people he had already brought there, and if they all thought it was just a normal date at first. The rest of the conversation felt tense after that. I kept nodding along while mentally planning how fast I could leave without making a scene. He didn't act threatening or aggressive. If anything, he looked excited, like he had finally found the perfect subject. That word alone made my skin crawl. Eventually, I said I needed to get going because I had an early morning. He looked disappointed, but didn't push too hard. As we stood up, he mentioned that the property was only about 20 minutes away if I ever changed my mind. I left the coffee shop and walked straight to my car without looking back. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me, and I checked his profile again. It was gone. Completely deleted. I never saw him again after that. But every once in a while I still think about that empty house he talked about. The one full of cameras and hallways designed to mess with people's instincts. And I still wonder how many people walked through that place thinking they were just on a normal first date. The weird part started before I even left my apartment. I remember standing in front of my closet staring at a red shirt and thinking it was a strange request for a first date. Not a huge deal or anything, just oddly specific. Most people on dating apps don't care what you wear as long as you show up looking normal. But this girl had been really clear about it. I matched with her on Tinder about 4 days earlier. Her profile looked normal. A couple photos taken at parks, one selfie in a car, another picture with a dog that might have been hers or maybe just someone else's. Her bio was short and kind of random. It said she liked quiet places and people watching. That was it. We started messaging and the conversation was easy. She seemed funny and kind of sarcastic. The kind of person who replies fast and keeps things moving. After a while, she suggested meeting up at a bar downtown that I had never been to before. She said it was usually quiet on weeknights. Then she added the strange part. She said it would help if I wore a red shirt so she could recognize me easily when I walked in. At first, I thought she was joking, but she repeated it a few times like it actually mattered. She said the place sometimes got crowded and she didn't want to accidentally miss me walking in. Looking back now, that logic makes zero sense. But at the time, I just shrugged and said sure. It felt like a harmless request. So there I was on Friday night, staring at my closet holding a red shirt that I barely wore. I remember thinking it looked a little bright, but whatever. I threw it on, grabbed my jacket, and drove downtown. The bar she picked was in a part of the city I didn't visit much. The street had a few older buildings and dim streetlights. When I parked my car and walked toward the entrance, I noticed the place looked older than I expected, kind of narrow with dark windows. Inside it was quieter than most bars on a Friday. Low lighting, maybe 15 people total spread around the room. A few small tables near the walls and a long bar counter running across the back. The place had that slightly worn look like it had been around for years. The first thing I noticed was the smell of food and beer mixed together. The second thing I noticed was the color red. At first my brain didn't register it properly, but then I started seeing it everywhere. The guy sitting near the entrance was wearing a red hoodie. Two women at a table near the window both had red shirts on. Another guy at the bar had a dark red jacket draped over his chair. It wasn't exactly unusual. Red is a normal color, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. And then something else hit me. Several of them were looking directly at me. Not casually glancing either, they were staring. At first I assumed it was because I had just walked in. People look at the door when someone enters a room. That's normal. But the stares lasted longer than that. I walked toward the bar and ordered a drink while scanning the room for the girl I was supposed to meet. I didn't see anyone that matched her profile pictures. But I definitely saw more red shirts. A group of 3 people near the back table were wearing the same color. One of them slowly turned their head and looked straight at me like they had been waiting for something. That's when the feeling started building in my chest that something was off. I checked my phone to see if she had messaged me. Nothing. So I sent a quick message saying I had arrived. While waiting for a response, I sat on a bar stool and looked around again. It became impossible to ignore the pattern. At least 8 people in that bar were wearing red, and almost all of them had looked at me at some point since I walked in. Not smiling, not nodding, just staring. I tried convincing myself it was coincidence. Maybe there was some sports event earlier that night and people were wearing team colors or something. That explanation made enough sense for about 2 minutes. Then a guy at the end of the bar turned fully in his seat and stared at me without blinking for a few seconds. It wasn't subtle at all. The bartender handed me my drink, and even he seemed slightly distracted, like he was also aware of something strange happening in the room. My phone buzzed. It was her. She said she was almost there and told me to stay exactly where I was. That message made my stomach tighten a little. I stayed on the stool and tried to act normal while taking small sips from the glass. More people kept looking at me. One woman at a table across the room leaned closer to the guy next to her and said something while pointing slightly in my direction. At this point, the pattern was obvious. Everyone wearing red was watching me. The weirdest part was how quiet the room had gotten. Not silent, but quieter than before. Conversations had slowed down like people were paying attention to something else. Me. About 5 minutes later, the door opened again. A girl walked in wearing a black jacket and jeans. I recognized her right away from her photos. She scanned the room for a second and then spotted me at the bar. When she started walking toward me, something really strange happened. Several of the people wearing red also shifted in their seats at the same time. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. Like they were reacting to her arrival. She sat down next to me and smiled like everything was completely normal. But the stares around the room didn't stop. I kept noticing people glance at us and then look away quickly. After a couple minutes, I leaned slightly toward her and mentioned that a lot of people seemed to be wearing the same color tonight. She looked around the room slowly like she was counting them. Then she smiled again. It wasn't a comforting smile. More like someone who was satisfied with how something turned out. That's when she explained it. She told me she'd been running a social observation project for the past few months. It wasn't official or connected to a school, just something she did for fun. She studied how people react when they realize they are the center of attention in a public place. The red shirts were part of the SEB. My brain took a second to process what she was saying. Apparently earlier that evening, she had asked several friends to come to the bar wearing red and sit in different areas of the room. Their job was simple. When I walked in wearing the same color, they were supposed to look at me periodically and see how I reacted. She said it helped measure discomfort levels and social awareness. I remember staring at her wondering if this was some kind of prank. She said she chose me because I seemed like someone who paid attention to details. The more she explained to the stranger it sounded. She had basically organized a room full of strangers to watch me without me knowing. I looked around again and realized the people staring earlier were not trying to act casual. But a few of them were still watching. The whole thing made me feel weird in a way I can't fully explain. Not angry exactly, just uncomfortable. Like the entire room had been turned into some kind of observation box, and I had walked straight into it. She seemed really interested in how I felt about it, though. She kept asking if I noticed the stares right away or if it took time. I answered a couple questions, but my mind was already drifting toward leaving. After finishing my drink, I said I had an early morning and needed to head out. She didn't argue much. She just nodded and thanked me for being part of the project. Part of the project. That phrase stuck in my head. When I stood up to leave, I noticed several of the red shirt people watching again. Not aggressively, just quietly. I walked out of the bar feeling like I had just walked off a stage without realizing I had been performing. The girl never messaged me again after that night, and I never went back to that bar. But now every time I walk into a crowded room, I sometimes catch myself checking what colors people are wearing, just in case someone out there is running another little experiment. I didn't expect much when I swiped right that evening. It was late. I had been scrolling through Tinder half asleep, mostly out of boredom. His profile looked completely normal. Average guy, brown hair, a little scruffy, holding a coffee cup in one picture and a dog in the next. Nothing that screamed red flag. His bio said he liked video games and hiking, and he had that weird kind of smile in his photos that made you feel like he might be genuine. We started messaging, and at first it was the usual stuff. Small talk about where we worked, our favorite shows, and who we knew in the city. He was polite, careful with his words, like he didn't want to say the wrong thing. After a couple of days, he suggested meeting for drinks. I agreed. I picked a small bar that I liked downtown. It wasn't crowded, the kind of place with low lighting and mismatched chairs, a tiny stage for live music that wasn't playing that night. When I arrived, he was already there, standing awkwardly near the bar. He looked exactly like his photos, maybe a little thinner, and there was this nervous energy radiating off him. He kept fidgeting with his phone, adjusting his sleeves, and glancing at the door every few seconds. Not a big deal. People get nervous on first dates, I told myself. We ordered drinks and found a table in a corner. For the first hour, it was mostly normal. He laughed at my jokes, asked me questions, and I did the same. But there was a tension under it all, a sort of tightness in his shoulders that I couldn't ignore. Every time he took a sip, he seemed to exhale a little relief, like he had been holding something in. After the second round, the nervous energy got heavier. He started talking about how awkward first dates were, how he never knew what to say. I nodded along, thinking he was just shy. But then he leaned in a little and said something that made me freeze. He confessed that he hadn't actually matched with me because he wanted to. Someone had offered him money to go on a date with me. He said it softly, almost like he was embarrassed, but his words hit like a punch. Not in an angry way, not in a dramatic way, just a blunt fact that made my stomach sink. I sat there trying to process it. He explained that a mutual acquaintance, or maybe someone I didn't know, had contacted him online, offered him a sum of money to go on a date with me, and he had agreed. He said he didn't know why I had been targeted or what the person's intent was, just that he had been paid to match and meet me. He seemed apologetic, almost desperate for me to understand that he hadn't planned it. But the more he spoke, the heavier it got in my chest. Suddenly, every smile, every question, every laugh felt like part of some arrangement I hadn't agreed to. I tried to keep it casual, asking how much money he had been offered, and he told me. It was a small amount, not life-changing, just enough that it felt weird to refuse. He kept looking down at his hands, shaking slightly. I couldn't tell if he felt guilty or terrified. Probably both. I wanted to leave right then, but I didn't. I wanted to hear the whole story. He said that at first he thought it was just some prank or a joke, but the person had been serious. They wanted to see how I would behave on a date, or maybe how he would behave while dating me. He couldn't tell exactly. And that's why he was so nervous, because he didn't know how far it would go, what the expectations were, or if he was supposed to report back in some way. The longer he explained, the more my mind started spinning. I thought about all the possible people in my life who could have arranged this, all the interactions and messages that could have been manipulated. It felt like some invisible hand had been moving pieces around me without my knowledge. He started telling me about the pressure he felt once he agreed. Every move, every word, every laugh. He was hyper-aware that he might be watched or judged, that someone might be taking notes on how I reacted. I remember the way his eyes darted around the bar as he spoke. Not because anyone was actually watching us in that moment, but because he had imagined it so vividly that he couldn't shake it. I kept thinking about how long he might have been involved in this scheme. Had he gone on other paid dates? Were there recordings, texts, screenshots somewhere documenting everything? The thought made the air in the bar feel heavier. He told me that after agreeing, he tried to make it as normal as possible. He genuinely wanted to enjoy the date, or at least act like he was enjoying it. But every laugh, every sip, every glance at my face had been shadowed by the knowledge that someone else was paying attention to him, and by extension, paying attention to me. By this point, my drink had gone warm and I didn't even notice. I couldn't focus on anything except the reality that someone had monetized my first impression without my knowledge. The realization made me feel exposed, like a stranger had mapped out part of my life just for entertainment or some private curiosity. He kept talking, almost spilling everything in a rush. He said he had told the person it wasn't necessary to continue once he realized it was wrong. But they insisted. He said he was terrified of saying no, worried about retaliation or being shamed, and even if the amount of money was small, he felt trapped. I couldn't help picturing him rehearsing responses in his head while messaging me, calculating how to act casual while secretly being paid. Everything from the initial swipe to this moment seemed tainted. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wide, trembling slightly. He asked if I was angry, if I wanted him to leave, and I realized I didn't even know what I wanted. Part of me wanted to run out of the bar immediately, but part of me just wanted to hear every detail, every word, every confession. He told me he felt horrible, That meeting me had been a genuine experience for him, even if the start was artificial. He said he had enjoyed talking to me, liked my energy, and felt terrible at the beginning was influenced by money. I didn't respond immediately. I just sat there, my brain buzzing, trying to figure out how to process this. He reached out and placed his hand on the table, as if to reassure me that he was being sincere. The bar around us didn't matter anymore. I wasn't hearing music, clinking glasses for laughter. The room had narrowed down to just the two of us and the story he had just dropped into my lap. Eventually, I told him I needed some air. I left my chair, walked outside, and felt the cold night press against my skin. My phone buzzed. He had messaged me again, apologizing and explaining everything one more time. I didn't respond. I just walked down the street, letting the city noises wash over me, trying to feel normal again. I don't know what anyone wanted to gain from setting this up. I don't know if anyone else had gone on similar paid dates in the city, unknowingly cataloged for someone else's amusement. I don't know if it was a one-time thing or part of a pattern. The weirdest part is how human he had seemed throughout it all. Nervous, apologetic, honest once he confessed. But the underlying reality, that someone had orchestrated a date using me as a target, was enough to make the night feel like it had been a performance without my consent. I never saw him again. He didn't reach out, and I didn't reach out either. But the image of that tiny bar, his shaking hands, and the way he looked down at his drink while confessing the whole thing has stuck with me. Even now, I sometimes wonder if the person who paid him is still out there, watching, collecting details, or if they even remember it. I know it sounds paranoid, but after that night, it's impossible to feel completely unseen in the city again. And the worst part isn't anger or fear exactly. It's the realization that a simple, casual swipe, which should have led to a normal date, was quietly turned into something transactional before I even had a chance to meet the person. It makes you second guess how ordinary anything is. I thought I had swiped right on a normal person. Her profile was bright, full of outdoor photos, smiling in sunlight, clearly into travel and dogs. Nothing that screamed warning. We messaged for a couple weeks before meeting. She was funny in chat, always asking questions, keeping it light. When she suggested coming over for dinner, I figured it would be casual, low-key. She had this way of talking that made it feel like she'd already imagined the night, which was a little intense but not necessarily creepy at first. I showed up at her apartment a little after 7. The building was old, a narrow brick exterior with stairs that creaked when I climbed them. She greeted me warmly, but there was this focus in her eyes, like she'd been expecting every detail of this moment for a long time. The apartment itself looked tidy, almost staged, and smelled faintly of cinnamon and cleaner. Everything was set up for dinner. Candles lit the table, soft music playing, and I noticed the way she moved around, pouring wine, adjusting chairs, placing plates, like a choreography she had perfected. At first, the date went smoothly. Conversation flowed. She asked about my family, my work, my hobbies, but the questions weren't just casual curiosity. They had a weight, a subtle edge, like she was trying to map my life. I laughed and answered, thinking she was just attentive. She made comments about places I wanted to visit, plans I'd thought about making, almost like she had been listening to more than just our chats. And then she started talking about things like what kind of vacations we could take together, how we'd set up a home, even what our weekends might look like in the next year. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off. Some people just get excited quickly, I told myself. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to the bathroom. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the soft music leaking from the living room. When I pushed the door open, I noticed the mirror above the sink. It was ordinary, rectangular, clean. I leaned over the counter and started washing my hands. Then I froze. Something wasn't right. I glanced up again and noticed faint writing on the mirror. My reflection stood in front of it, but behind me, in letters that seemed hastily drawn with a finger, were words I hadn't seen when I entered. I blinked a few times, leaned closer. It said, "Stay." I spun around. The wall behind me was blank. No sticky notes, no paper, no message anywhere. I stepped back, heart starting to beat faster. Maybe it was a reflection of something in the glass itself. Maybe it had been there all along. But I would have seen it when I walked in. I was sure of it. I looked back at the mirror. The word was still there. My reflection in it looked normal, but the message didn't. It was faint, almost smeared, like someone had written it and then rubbed at it. I turned around again. Nothing. I stepped closer to the mirror. The letters were larger than I remembered seeing. Stay. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, my eyes playing games. But the feeling in my chest was heavy, tightening. I thought about leaving immediately, but the front door was a good 10 steps away, and leaving without a word felt impossible. I heard her voice calling softly from the living room, asking if everything was okay. I turned back, forcing my expression neutral. I went back to the table, trying to act normal. She didn't notice anything, or at least she didn't comment. Dinner continued, but I couldn't shake the mirror. My eyes kept flicking toward it whenever I got a chance. My hands felt sweaty, the wine tasted metallic. She started talking about things like how she had been imagining our life together for months, how she pictured our future dinners, our shared routines. Every detail she mentioned lined up with things I had only casually told her, but now, thinking back, it felt like she had cataloged everything. Every story, every childhood memory I had mentioned online or in passing, she had stored. After the meal, she suggested we move to the living room. I nodded, sitting across from her on the couch, trying to relax, though my mind was spinning. She asked if I wanted another drink, and I shook my head, pretending to be tired. Then she leaned closer, voice soft, eyes steady, and I noticed a notebook on the coffee table. It was open, filled with writing. My name was on the top of the first page. She had pages and pages of notes, lists, observations. Everything I'd said during our chats, every preference, every tiny detail I had mentioned months ago, it was all there. I felt a cold realization settle in. She hadn't just been attentive. She had been collecting, planning, preparing. And the word on the mirror, the stay, suddenly clicked. This wasn't about a casual dinner. It was about controlling the space, setting the tone, making sure I didn't leave. I told myself I had to leave, but the air around me felt heavy, like leaving wasn't a simple option. My stomach churned, my hands fidgeted on my knees. I looked at her again. She was smiling, calm, like nothing was wrong. But that calmness made it worse. It wasn't warmth, it was expectation. I excused myself again, pretending to check my phone. My stomach dropped when I passed the bathroom door. The mirror reflected my back again, empty space behind me. I wanted to run in, rip the mirror down, smash it, but I didn't. I just leaned close again. And there it was written across the glass. Stay. I swallowed hard, backing up. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't understand how it was there. I hadn't noticed it before, and the wall behind me was bare. There was no logical explanation. I didn't stay to analyze it further. I went back to the couch, trying to act normal, but I couldn't focus on anything she said. Her plans, her future, her attention, it all felt like a trap. The word was a warning and an instruction at the same time, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched even when I wasn't looking. Finally, I told her I needed to leave. I kept my voice steady, made an excuse about work in the morning, but inside I was panicking. She didn't resist. She smiled, walked me to the door, and as I left, I caught her looking back at the mirror. Her expression was unreadable, calm, satisfied. I didn't stop walking until I was down the street, lights from nearby buildings reflecting off the wet pavement. My chest was tight, my legs a little shaky. I couldn't stop thinking about that mirror, about the word that had appeared behind me, about her notebook filled with observations, about the way she had talked about our life together, all imagined, all planned. The apartment building disappeared behind me as I walked faster, and I realized that even though I had left, part of me felt trapped in that space. Trapped in the idea of her attentiveness, her planning, her careful preparation. I never responded to her messages after that night. I deleted the conversation from Tinder. I don't even know if she tried to contact me again. But the memory of the mirror, the word STAY, keeps coming back when I think about dating apps, casual invites, and the illusion of normalcy. Sometimes I catch myself imagining what else could appear behind me in a reflection, and it makes me check every mirror twice, even in my own apartment. The worst part is that I don't think she needed to be physically present for it to feel that way. The planning, the preparation, the idea that someone could catalog every tiny detail of your life, it's enough to make you feel caught, observed, and not entirely free. I thought it was just a casual Friday night. I had matched with him on Tinder a few weeks earlier. His profile was simple: a selfie in a hoodie, a picture at some local coffee shop, and a bio that said he liked movies and late-night pizza. Nothing flashy, nothing weird. The chat was normal, a little awkward, but he was polite, and I figured why not meet up for dinner. I chose a small bistro downtown that I liked. The kind of place with warm lights, booths along the walls, and low chatter that makes it easy to hear yourself think. When I arrived, he was already there, standing near the entrance, scanning the room. He waved when he saw me, and I waved back. At first, he seemed charming enough, polite, smiling, complimenting my outfit, pulling out my chair. Everything looked normal. We ordered food and started talking, and I thought maybe he was just shy, because there was a kind of tension in the way he moved, a stiffness in his hands and shoulders. The first time he disappeared, I thought he went to the bathroom. A few minutes passed, nothing. Then 15. I glanced at the staff, asked politely if they'd seen him, and they said he hadn't gone that way. I started feeling uncomfortable, but I tried to keep calm. Maybe he stepped outside to take a call, I told myself. When he returned, he acted normal. He laughed at a joke I made, ordered a drink, and leaned in like nothing had happened. But the unease settled in my chest. Then it happened again. He would excuse himself for a moment, disappearing for long stretches. I noticed him glancing out the windows when he left, stepping into the hall, then coming back as if nothing was unusual. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe he had an anxious streak, but it started to feel deliberate. By the time our entrees arrived, I was on edge. I kept noticing him fidgeting, walking away repeatedly, returning quickly, and sitting back down with a calm that felt too practiced. I wanted to ask him what he was doing, but I didn't want to make it weird. The idea of confrontation made my stomach twist. Finally, curiosity and rising fear got the better of me. I waited until he slipped away again, and this time I followed quietly. I stayed behind a corner, out of sight, creeping down the narrow hallway that led to the back sections of the restaurant. The air smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. The walls were lined with framed prints of city streets, and the hum of the kitchen and bar felt distant. I rounded a corner and froze. There he was, crouched in front of one of the large front windows. His phone was pressed to the glass, and he was snapping photos, one after another, of the booth we had been sitting at. The angle was perfect, me framed in the dim light, unaware. His hands were steady now, focused, like he had been rehearsing this. My heart started pounding in my chest. I stepped back, trying to stay quiet. I wanted to shout, to storm out, to confront him, but something kept me frozen. The realization that I had been photographed, unseen, while thinking I was on a normal date, felt surreal. I felt exposed, like every moment I had laughed, leaned forward, or sipped my drink had been captured. He didn't notice me. He was focused, methodical, clicking photos, adjusting angles, holding the phone at different heights. It was precise, careful, like he had been planning this for weeks. My stomach turned. I had never felt this kind of violation before, this creeping sense that someone you trust could be observing you secretly while pretending to be normal. I wanted to leave immediately, but stepping out of the hallway meant crossing the open space near him. I couldn't risk him seeing me. I backed up slowly, turned another corner, and paused to catch my breath. My hands were trembling, and the familiar sounds of the bistro, the clatter of dishes, low music, soft conversation, suddenly felt wrong. Everything felt like it was part of a performance he was controlling. I waited a few minutes, listening to him move around, snapping photos, before finally creeping back toward the main dining area. By the time I returned to the booth, he had resumed the appearance of casual normalcy. He smiled, made a small joke, and acted like nothing had happened. I nodded, forcing a smile, pretending I hadn't seen him crouched like some predator behind the window. Every laugh, every gesture felt tainted. I couldn't focus on the food, the ambience, the conversation. All I could think about was the gallery of photos he was probably saving on his phone. Photos of me, unaware, my expressions frozen, my gestures cataloged. By the time we finished dinner, I had made up my mind to leave immediately afterward. I told him I was tired, needed to get going. He offered to walk me to my car, but I declined, finding the courage to walk alone into the night. My stomach was in knot, every sound of the city echoing in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about the moments he had captured, the hidden camera he didn't have, but the phone in his hand had done the work all the same. The next day, I deleted the conversation from Tinder, blocked his number, and tried to shake off the creeping fear. But I couldn't stop imagining him, crouched in the hallway, snapping photos, cataloging the moments I thought were private. The feeling of being observed, recorded without consent, stayed with me in every public space afterward. I couldn't eat at that bistro again, I couldn't sit at any window table without scanning the room for cameras or people taking photos. The simple act of dining out, something that should have been ordinary, became a calculation, a risk assessment. Weeks later, I realized how quickly trust can be built and how quickly it can be used against you. He had seemed like a normal date, polite, even kind in small ways, and yet he had been hiding this entire surveillance under the surface. I didn't know if he had done it before, or if he was planning to do it again. The thought that this could happen to anyone, anywhere, was chilling. I sometimes wonder if the photos still exist. If he ever looks back at them, laughs, or just forgets about the little collection of someone else's life moments captured without permission. And sometimes when I'm out at dinner or walking past a window, I feel eyes on me and I flinch, my body remembering that hallway, that crouched figure, that casual smile afterward as if nothing had happened. The scariest part wasn't that he took the photos. It was that he could have done it, and I would never have known if I hadn't followed him. The illusion of a normal date, the act of sitting across from someone you trust, can be shattered in seconds when someone chooses to use it against you. It left me with a constant awareness that the world could be watching at any time, that any smile, gesture, or laugh could be captured without my consent. And I knew I would never forget that night, that hallway, and the way he moved with quiet precision behind the glass. I thought I was just getting lucky on Tinder for once. I matched with her a few weeks earlier. Her profile was cheerful, full of smiling selfies in caves and hiking trails, captions about loving weekends with friends, nothing alarming. We chatted lightly for a couple weeks, mostly memes and small talk, and then she suggested a group hangout at a local bar. She made it sound casual, fun, nothing intense, and I figured, why not? I'd never done a group date before, so it seemed like a good way to meet people and avoid the awkward first date pressure. I arrived at the bar a little after 8. It was small, dimly lit with a rustic vibe, exposed brick, wooden tables, and a few low-hanging lamps over the booths. The kind of place that felt cozy if you ignored the low hum of other patrons talking and the occasional clatter from the kitchen. She was already there, sitting at a corner table with 3 other women, all laughing over something I couldn't hear from the entrance. She waved me over, smiling like I was expected, and I walked toward them, trying to play it cool. At first, the night seemed like any casual hangout. Drinks arrived, and conversation flowed. She asked questions, remembered little details I'd mentioned in my Tinder profile, laughed at the right moments, and the others chimed in. Everything felt surprisingly comfortable. I found myself relaxing, enjoying the easy laughter and the feeling of being part of a small, friendly group. But there were little things that didn't sit right. Every time I answered a question, one of them would glance at the others and nod subtly, like they were noting something down in silence. When I told the story, it was repeated back with slight alterations, like they had rehearsed responses to gauge my reactions. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe they were just paying attention, I thought. Maybe I was overthinking. As the night went on, the atmosphere shifted. They started asking more personal questions, carefully framed, probing my likes, dislikes, habits, even small fears. Nothing felt dangerous exactly, but the precision in their questioning made me tense. Every answer seemed to trigger a ripple of glances and whispered comments across the table. I began to notice how coordinated they were, the way they moved in unison, the small gestures like hands brushing over menus at the same moment or taking sips at the exact same time. It was subtle at first, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. My mind started racing. Why was everyone acting like this? Was it some inside joke I wasn't in on? Was I overreacting? I kept telling myself to relax, but my chest tightened with unease. By the time we were finishing our second round of drinks, I had developed a knot in my stomach. Something was off. I excused myself to the bathroom, partly to get a moment alone, partly to think. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection. The mirror showed me sitting alone in a tiny bathroom stall, calm in appearance, but inside I felt like I was unraveling. When I returned, they were still talking, still laughing, still perfectly synchronized. My date leaned closer across the table, smiling, and then she said it, finally to reveal the thing that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a compliment, it wasn't a tease, it wasn't an apology for any awkwardness during the night. It was the truth. I wasn't on a date. I had never been on a date. I was part of a psychological experiment. Every smile, every question, Every laugh, every response had been designed to see how I would react, how easily I could be influenced, how compliant I was under subtle social pressures. She explained, matter-of-factly, that the other women weren't friends. They were collaborators, part of the experiment, trained to manipulate and observe, to gather data on my reactions, my decisions, my body language. I felt like the floor had fallen out from under me. The bar, the lights, the laughter, it all became sinister. Every comment I had made, every little story I had shared, every expression I thought was private, had been captured for analysis. They had been watching me, recording mental notes, steering my behavior, shaping the night around me without me knowing. I tried to speak, tried to demand answers, but it wasn't about answering. It was about observation, about control, about measuring how someone like me would respond to subtle manipulation. The casual fun I had felt was fake, engineered, and every instinct I had about enjoying myself had been a lie. I had been the subject, not a participant. I wanted to leave immediately, but the tight grip of disbelief held me there. The group laughed, casual and rehearsed, like nothing was wrong. They had practiced this many times before, and I had just walked into their scene, unprepared, unsuspecting, vulnerable. The explanation went on, detailing how they had tested my compliance, my reactions to flattery, to embarrassment, to inclusion and exclusion, to subtle pressures. Each step of the night, from the entrance to the ordering of drinks to the teasing laughter, had been designed to provoke specific emotional and behavioral responses. They had watched me, recorded my responses, and analyzed them silently, like scientists in a field study. I felt violated, exposed, stripped of agency. My life, my reactions, my choices had been quietly observed and measured while I believed I was simply enjoying a night out. The horror wasn't physical. It wasn't even a threat. It was the realization that everything I thought was voluntary, that everything I thought was casual was orchestrated. My consent had been an illusion, my trust a tool. I left the bar as soon as I could, walking into the night, the city lights blinding in their normalcy. I felt raw, drained, disoriented. Every glance from a stranger on the street made my skin crawl. Was I being observed? Were other nights, other dates, also experiments in disguise? I felt like a ghost, a subject being analyzed without the possibility of consent, without the possibility of knowing when the experiment ended. In the days after, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily I had been manipulated, how normal it had all seemed, how convincingly the experiment had been conducted. Every laugh, every joke, every touch, every moment had been calculated to test my reactions. I felt like the world was more fragile than I had imagined, like anyone could slip into a role, construct a reality around me, and I would have no idea until it was revealed. I avoided dating apps for weeks, then months. I couldn't trust casual interactions, casual invitations, even casual strangers. The idea that someone could orchestrate a scenario so perfectly, so quietly, without my knowledge lingered in my mind. Every friend, every coworker, every new person I met felt like they could be part of some hidden experiment, waiting to observe, waiting to manipulate. The worst part wasn't the manipulation itself. It was the realization that my own instincts, my own perceptions, had been rendered unreliable. What I thought was fun, safe, friendly, had been completely fabricated. The illusion of normal human interaction had been shattered, and the echo of that night followed me everywhere. Even now, thinking about it, I can feel the subtle tension in my chest, the knot of unease that comes from knowing that what you see isn't always what it is. That night, the smiles, the laughter, the warmth of being included, it was all data. And I had been just another subject, caught in an experiment I never signed up for. I thought I was doing something normal that Friday night. I matched with him on Tinder a few days before, and the conversation was quiet but pleasant. Nothing intense, no weird messages, just casual small talk about movies, favorite restaurants, and how the week had been. He suggested dinner at a small downtown place I hadn't been to before. I usually avoid meeting people I don't know in person, but something about him felt calm, polite, low-key, so I agreed. I figured it was just a normal first date, low pressure, easy. When I arrived, he was already at the table, seated in a corner booth with the warm light of a lamp over the edge of the table. The restaurant had this oddly cozy vibe, wooden floors, tiny potted plants along the windowsills, a few paintings of abstract shapes on the walls. The kind of place where the staff noticed who's been coming and going, but it wasn't crowded, so it felt private. He smiled when he saw me get up to pull out my chair, and I felt a strange sense of relief. He was polite, quiet, and that calm demeanor made me relax a little. The first part of the date was normal enough. We ordered drinks, the menu was casual, nothing fancy, and we started talking about music, movies, work, small things that anyone might bring up on a first date. He smiled in the right spots, nodded appropriately, asked questions about me, and seemed interested without being overbearing. Everything was fine, maybe a little boring, but comfortable. I kept thinking maybe this was one of those uneventful first dates that just set a base for conversation later. Then, after our drinks arrived, the waitress came by. She leaned slightly over the table and asked if everything was okay. I was a little surprised and glanced at him. He nodded politely, the same polite, quiet smile, and I nodded back. I said yes, everything was fine. She paused, looking at him, then whispered something else. My stomach dropped. She explained that 3 other women had left the restaurant earlier that night, all saying the exact same man had made them uncomfortable during their visits. I felt a cold wave go through me. The voice in my head screamed that this wasn't random. The polite, quiet demeanor wasn't normal, it was a facade. I didn't know what to do. My hands were frozen on the table, my fork halfway to my mouth. I tried to think, tried to recall how he had behaved before, but nothing seemed obvious. His politeness, the careful way he had laughed at my jokes, his steady gaze, all of it had seemed completely normal. But now every detail was terrifying, every calm gesture a potential manipulation. He noticed the waitress had said something and continued eating as if nothing had happened. The calmness of it was surreal. There was no change in his expression, no awkward attempt to explain, nothing. It was like he knew the truth and it didn't matter, like this revelation wasn't going to stop him at all. My mind raced. Had I been observed before I arrived? Was this pattern of discomfort something he repeated with every date? Every woman? I tried to act normal, tried to finish my drink, keep the conversation going, but my words felt forced. I could feel the tension creeping into my chest, my palms starting to sweat. Every movement he made seemed rehearsed now, every glance a calculated act. The entire restaurant felt suffocating, and every other person around us was suddenly a potential witness to something I didn't want to happen. After the initial shock, I forced myself to stand. I said I needed to go, and he nodded politely, still calm, still quiet. The waitress watched me as I gathered my coat and purse. Her expression was sympathetic but neutral, like she had seen this before, and there was nothing she could do in that moment to change the pattern. The fear that had been building in my chest made my steps quick, unsteady, tense. I just wanted to get out, away from him, away from that quiet, polite facade. Outside, the city lights felt almost harsh in contrast to the cozy dimness of the restaurant. I kept walking quickly, glancing behind me, but he wasn't following. My hands shook as I texted a friend, trying to get a grip on reality. I felt violated in a way I couldn't explain. There had been no physical threat, nothing overt, but the knowledge that he had unsettled other women that night, that pattern existed, made me feel unsafe in a visceral way. The next day, I couldn't stop replaying every moment. Every word he had said, every smile, every polite gesture seemed suspect. What had been normal was now a reminder of something predatory lurking behind the surface. I realized how easily someone could manipulate a quiet, polite demeanor into a sense of trust, how terrifying it was that his calmness masked the impact he had had on others. I blocked him on Tinder immediately, deleted the conversation, and tried to avoid the restaurant. Even the thought of small, quiet, polite men in restaurants made my stomach tighten. I kept thinking about the other women, 3 of them, who had left before me, who had experienced the same unease, and I felt a strange mix of relief and horror. Relief that I wasn't alone, that others had noticed, and horror that the pattern existed and would continue. In the following weeks, I avoided first dates at small restaurants, avoided quiet cafes, and became hyper-aware of any subtle cues in a person's behavior. The fear wasn't just about him. It was about the realization that someone could appear calm, polite, and normal while leaving a trail of discomfort and unease in their wake. The violation was psychological, quiet, and relentless. I never saw him again. I don't know if he continued these patterns elsewhere with other women in other cities. The memory of that quiet, polite demeanor, the calm mask, the smile, the polite gestures, lingered long after the night ended. Even now, I remember the way the waitress had leaned over the table, the words she whispered, and the sudden terrible clarity that the polite, quiet man in front of me was not what he seemed. Every time I go to a restaurant alone now, I scan the room. I watch interactions, the small gestures, the subtle body language. That night taught me that calm, polite behavior isn't always safe, that some people can hide their impact behind a mask of normalcy, and that sometimes the quietest presence can leave the deepest mark. I never thought I would be part of that kind of horror, the kind where nothing physically happens but everything psychologically shifts. It's a quiet terror, the kind that leaves you second-guessing everyone who smiles at you politely, everyone who seems normal, everyone who seems calm. And that night, that quiet date, reminded me that danger doesn't always announce itself. It sometimes whispers behind polite smiles and soft gestures. I matched with him on Tinder late one Thursday night after a long day of classes and work. I wasn't expecting much, honestly, just someone to chat with while I scrolled through memes and tried to unwind. His messages were light, casual, nothing rude at all. He had a goofy profile picture where he looked awkward but friendly, and his bio said something about loving comic books and hiking. It didn't scream danger or anything. It just seemed normal, boring, even, but in a good way. We talked for a few days, mostly in the evenings when I was finally free from my routine. He suggested grabbing coffee or a drink somewhere quiet so we could actually talk in person. I agree, mostly because I was tired of endless texting and thought it could be an easy, chill first date. I remember feeling slightly excited but mostly casual, like this was just another ordinary swipe outcome, nothing more. I arrived at the cafe a little early. It was one of those small, dimly lit spots with a smell of roasted coffee beans and a few scattered couches and tables. The kind of place where people usually go to read or work on laptops. He was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking a little anxious but not in a bad way. He waved me over and I smiled, trying to shake off the little nervousness I felt meeting someone for the first time. The first part of the date went normally. We ordered drinks, sat down, and talked about school, work, and random things like favorite TV shows and where we liked to eat around town. He laughed at my jokes in the right places, smiled when it made sense, and I honestly started to relax. He was quiet at times, but attentive, nodding and making small observations that made it feel like he was listening. I liked that part of him, someone who actually paid attention. Then, after about 20 minutes, he suddenly asked if we could take a selfie together. He said it casually, like it was something normal people did all the time, but there was this insistence in his tone that didn't quite fit with the calm of the rest of the conversation. I hesitated for a second, but shrugged and held up my phone. We leaned in, and I smiled, and he grinned, and we snapped the photo. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was a harmless gesture, right? Just a memory of a first date, nothing more. We continued talking, finished our drinks, and I got the sense the date was winding down. I felt like it had gone okay. Nothing weird had happened, nothing scary or even unsettling. I left the cafe with a small wave and a mental note to maybe chat again the next day. I put the selfie on my phone, kind of forgot about it for the rest of the night, and tried to move on with my week. The next morning, I checked social media, scrolling aimlessly while eating breakfast. That's when I saw it. The selfie. Our photo. But it wasn't on my phone. It wasn't in a message from him. It was on some forum I had never seen before, posted publicly with a caption that made my stomach drop. Still missing. Last seen tonight. My hands shook as I tried to process what I was looking at. There I was smiling in that cafe, completely unaware, and now there it was, framed in a way that made me feel like I was a target, like something had been planned from the start. I opened my phone and checked the date on the post. It had been uploaded the same night we met. Someone had taken our selfie and added it to a page where people apparently tracked or predicted disappearances. I couldn't stop staring at it, couldn't stop feeling the sick realization creeping in. This wasn't just a harmless date. This wasn't just some creepy guy with social media obsessions. There was a plan, a system, and I had been caught in it without knowing it. I tried calling him, sending texts, all of which went unanswered. Panic started to bubble up in my chest. I couldn't wrap my head around how he had gotten the photo online so fast. The way the caption phrased it made it sound like I was already part of some list, some pattern that extended far beyond me. My first instinct was to go to the police to report what I saw, but even saying it out loud made it sound insane. How do you explain to someone that a Tinder date put your photo online on some creepy forum and labeled you as missing? I started retracing my steps from the previous night. I remembered sitting at the table, him asking for the selfie, the way he insisted just slightly more than a normal person would. I remembered how calm he had seemed, polite, normal. The more I thought about it, the more terrified I became. Every laugh, every nod, every small gesture suddenly felt like part of a performance. It wasn't casual at all. It was calculated. He had chosen me for a reason, manipulated a small moment, and created a record of it that could be used in ways I couldn't even imagine. I checked the forum again, trying to see if it was real or some kind of sick joke, and I realized it wasn't disappearing. It wasn't a meme or a viral post. The page was active, and there were other faces there too, other people, all of them smiling in photos taken at places that looked ordinary, everyday locations. Some of them were tagged with the same chilling phrase, still missing, last seen tonight. The pattern was obvious, and the realization was crushing. He wasn't just a man I had gone on a date with. He was part of something I couldn't see yet, a larger structure I wasn't supposed to understand, and I had been pulled into it without any warning. I contacted friends immediately, told them what I had seen. They urged me to report it to the police, to block him on every platform, and to stay somewhere safe for the night. I did all of it, but the feeling of exposure didn't leave. I had been photographed, tracked, and posted about without consent, and even though I was technically safe at that moment, the psychological weight of being singled out in a public, ominous way was suffocating. For the next few days, I stayed on high alert. Every notification made me jump. Every unknown number that called, every stranger who passed by on the street felt like it could be connected to him. The selfie that had once felt harmless now haunted me. It wasn't just a memory, it was proof, evidence of a plan, a record of my life taken without permission, and framed in a way that made me feel disposable. Weeks passed, but the image stayed with me. I stopped using Tinder, deleted my accounts, avoided meeting people in public spaces alone. Every time I think about it, I remember the exact angle of the photo, the way we were smiling, the casual pose that now felt sinister. That first innocent request for a selfie had been the key, the trigger that allowed him to mark me, label me, and set a chain of fear in motion that I didn't realize existed until it was too late. I never heard from him again. I don't know if he continues to use people like me for whatever this twisted forum is, but I know now that even ordinary moments, a first date, a selfie, can be manipulated into something terrifying. I've had to rethink how I interact with strangers, how much trust I give away, and how quickly a small, seemingly innocent gesture can turn into something threatening and irreversible. Even now, months later, the memory of that photo, the caption, and the forum lingers. It's not just the date that haunts me. It's the realization that someone could plan something so carefully, and I was completely unaware until I saw it online. That smile in the selfie, the normal setting of a cafe, the casual pose, those things that once felt ordinary are now forever tied to fear, to the knowledge that I was photographed and labeled without consent, and that somewhere out there, someone else might be next. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to get excited about creepy abandoned places. I always swore I had zero interest in ghost tours or exploring empty buildings, but when he suggested meeting at an old amusement park that had been closed for years because it was nostalgic, I didn't immediately say no. There was something about the idea that felt adventurous, like it could be fun and slightly reckless without actually being dangerous. I knew it sounded weird, but the messages we exchanged made it seem normal. He was charming, polite, and I kept thinking about how harmless he seemed. The night of the date, I drove out of the city, following the directions he had sent. It was a road I had never taken before, twisting through wooded areas, the streetlights growing farther apart until it was just me, and the headlights cutting through darkness. By the time I got close to the park, my phone's GPS signal was weak, the trees overhead making everything feel enclosed. I told myself it was fine, just part of the experience. I parked near the main entrance, which was blocked off with a rusty gate that was partially open. The place smelled faintly of rust, wet leaves, and something like old popcorn that had sat too long. I stepped out of the car and immediately felt that strange combination of thrill and unease, the kind that makes your stomach twist in anticipation. He was waiting near the ticket booth, looking small and quiet under the dim glow of a broken lamp. He smiled and waved like he'd been waiting there just for me. At first, it felt normal. We walked through the main path, stepping over weeds growing through the cracked concrete. The rides were still dark and covered in grime, but he talked about them like he had memories there as a kid. He pointed at the carousel, at the Ferris wheel, and even though I felt nervous, I tried to focus on the fun of it, on the weird nostalgia he insisted on. I laughed a few times, joking about how creepy it was that everything was frozen in time, and he laughed along. Then, without warning, the carousel started moving. I froze. The lights flickered on, weak and uneven, but enough to show the faded paint and chipped horses moving in a slow, eerie circle. He didn't seem startled. In fact, he looked almost pleased, like this was exactly what he wanted to happen. I told myself it was some leftover electricity still running through the circuits, but my gut was twisting tighter with every second. We walked toward the Ferris wheel next. I noticed something then. The rides weren't moving randomly. They were activating in a pattern like someone was flipping switches. I started to feel that creeping realization that we weren't alone, that something about him, about this place, was planned. He kept walking ahead, calm, as the Ferris wheel creaked and groaned to life. The ride turned slowly, lights flickering on and off, and for a moment, it was beautiful in a horrifying way. I realized then that he had done this before, that this wasn't accidental. I tried to laugh it off, tried to pretend it was all part of the charm of a strange date. But then the bumper car started. One by one, the lights lit up inside the empty cages, motors whirring. He didn't flinch. He seemed happy in a way that didn't match reality. I started paying closer attention to him, noticing how he didn't react to the noises in the same way I did. Every creak of metal, every flicker of lights, every motor whine seemed to excite him, and it made my skin crawl. We moved to the old funhouse next. He opened the door and walked in first. I hesitated, feeling the smell of mold and decay, the warped mirrors reflecting distorted versions of myself. He didn't speak, just gestured for me to follow. I stepped inside and realized how quiet it was except for the occasional sound of gears turning somewhere in the darkness. The mirrors warped my reflection, but then I noticed it wasn't just my reflection. There was movement behind me, just beyond what I could see. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. He was still ahead, calm, leading the way deeper into the maze. My heart was pounding, and I realized that this was more than a date. The rides turning on by themselves, the silence, the way he navigated the park, it felt like a setup. I didn't want to admit it yet, didn't want to confront the fact that I might be in danger, but the unease was growing into a kind of raw panic. We came out near the old roller coaster. I stopped at the base, looking up at the twisted metal and shadows. He walked toward the control box, the one covered in vines and rust, and pressed something. The roller coaster groaned and rattled to life, lights flickering along its track. I could hear the echoing clatter of empty cars moving, and my stomach sank. I started questioning every step I had taken to get here, every moment I had brushed off the little signs that didn't feel right. He didn't explain anything. He just stood there, calm, watching the rides with a kind of detached fascination. I felt frozen, realizing that I had no idea why he had brought me here. I tried to tell myself he just loved old amusement parks, but every instinct in my body screamed that something was off. There was a pattern to the way the rides activated, and it centered around him. He wasn't just a visitor. He was controlling this, and I was part of it. I started moving back toward the exit, trying to put distance between us and the rides. He followed quietly, not speaking, letting me move first. I noticed the small things then, the shadows in the corners, the sound of motors turning on behind us even as we walked away, the way some lights flickered in perfect timing with our movement. I felt trapped in some twisted game, a game he seemed to understand perfectly while I was still figuring out the rules. By the time we reached the parking lot, my mind was racing. He smiled and said something, though I couldn't hear him over the ringing in my ears. I got in my car and locked the doors, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that maybe he was just eccentric. But the amusement park wasn't quiet anymore. Lights blinked from the Ferris wheel in the distance, the carousel spinning slowly, the funhouse door creaking. I realized he had left something running, something that wasn't supposed to be on. I drove away, checking the rearview mirror constantly. Every shadow between the trees felt like it could be him watching. The sense of being monitored didn't leave me, even after the park disappeared behind the hills and I returned to the familiarity of streetlights and paved roads. My phone buzzed with a notification. I hadn't given him my number directly, but there it was, a picture of the rides in motion taken from my car. The caption reads something like, "Perfect night." I stopped responding to his messages after that. I avoided Tinder for weeks. I couldn't stop thinking about the park, the way the rides had turned on by themselves, the way he had moved through the space like he owned it. Part of me wanted to call the police, but how could I explain an abandoned amusement park with no one else there, lights turning on and rides moving? It would sound insane. The thing that stayed with me the longest wasn't the fear of him physically harming me. It was the realization that he could manipulate a place, control the environment, and draw me into it without me understanding until it was too late. Every time I think about amusement parks now, the memories of rusted metal, flickering lights, and quiet control over chaos come back. I know that somewhere he might be doing the same thing again, planning a night where the ordinary becomes terrifying, and the thrill isn't the rides, it's the person caught inside them. I never went back to that area. The park was probably condemned officially by now, or maybe it's still standing, waiting for someone else to follow the same path I did. Every time I see a carousel or a Ferris wheel, I feel that twinge of panic, the memory of lights turning on without warning and realizing how small and unaware I was in a space he completely controlled. That night left me with a fear that doesn't go away because it's not something that ended. It's something that could happen again, somewhere else with someone else. I never thought a simple Tinder date could turn into something that made me question reality, but here we are. I swiped right on her because her profile was just my kind of weird. Funny low captions, a lot of pictures in thrift stores, weird hats, all that. We started chatting, and she seemed chill, nothing off, nothing that made me pause. So when she asked to meet downtown at this old coffee shop that looked more like a tiny museum than a cave, I thought cool, casual, nothing crazy. The place was half empty when I got there. Wooden floors creaking, plants in every corner, jazz playing low enough that you had to pay attention to hear it. She was sitting at one of the small tables near the back, flipping through a notebook. When I walked in, she smiled, waved, and everything seemed normal. We talked about stupid stuff at first, music, movies, weird hobbies. I got the feeling that she noticed tiny details about me, like how I kept fiddling with my sleeve, or how I twirled my pen when I was thinking. After a while, we decided to walk. The weather was weirdly warm for late February, so I suggested wandering through the little side streets near the art district. She agreed, and we were laughing about some stupid joke I made when I noticed her glance behind us more than a couple of times. I thought maybe she just didn't like someone following us or something. Then we hit this narrow alleyway lined with graffiti and old brick walls. It smelled like wet cement and old trash. We were joking about how some of the street art looked like it was moving, and then she froze. 1 second we were laughing, the next she slammed her hand on my chest and screamed that I was following her. I literally stopped in my tracks. She screamed it louder, turned, and ran toward the street like I was some kind of predator. I called her name, but she didn't slow down, didn't look back, just kept yelling. People started noticing. Some kids on bikes stopped. A guy walking his dog took a few steps back, looking freaked out. A security guard from the fancy boutique at the corner ran over, asking what was happening. I tried to explain, but every time I got close, she yelled louder, insisting I had been following her for blocks, that I was creeping her out. She even pointed at me like I was the criminal. My stomach dropped, my head spun. I had no idea what to do because I had literally been with her the whole time, and she was twisting it like I had been stalking her. Security asked us to go to the back room of the boutique while they called the cops. My heart was hammering. I tried explaining again, but she just stared at me with this blank face and whispered something I couldn't hear at first. Eventually, she leaned closer and said she was sorry, that she needed someone to take the blame. I froze, trying to process it. Apparently, she had some thing going on with her ex, or maybe it was her landlord. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to trigger her more. I just sat there, dumbfounded, while she talked about needing proof that someone had been near her. The security guard was watching both of us like we were insane. I could feel my brain short-circuiting. My entire day had been normal, casual, just a coffee and a walk. Now, I was in this tiny office being accused of God knows what by someone I barely knew, someone I trusted enough to sit across from for 2 hours. The worst part was the way she looked at me. Not angry, not scared, just calculating, like I had been a piece in some game she was playing. I kept thinking about how easily she flipped the story, how fast she could convince anyone around us that I was the threat. And she had done it in public too, with witnesses who had no reason to believe me over her screaming. Eventually, the cops came. They asked me questions, wrote things down, looked at the security footage. She told them the same story she told the guard, that I had been following her, trying to scare her. I stayed calm, answered questions truthfully, but it didn't matter. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare where reality had been rewritten by her screams and whispers. I could see her smirk when the officers looked confused at the footage because it was all from weird angles, all enough to make me look like I was chasing her. Hours later, they let me go, but the feeling didn't leave. I walked back to my apartment through streets that suddenly felt hostile, every shadow suspicious. I kept thinking about how casual she had been before, how normal it felt when we were laughing. One minute we were joking about terrible movies, the next I was a criminal in someone else's story. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to find the point where things went wrong, but there was no moment, just a shift, a switch she flipped, and suddenly my entire world was upside down. It's been weeks since that night, and I still don't swipe right without double-checking the background of the person first. I don't trust that innocent smile anymore. Every notification from Tinder makes me tense. And the weirdest part is, I can picture her now walking down that alley, turning to scream at me, and then leaning close to whisper that line like it was some casual apology for using me as her scapegoat. I can't even hate her properly because I know she had no qualms about it. She just needed someone to blame, and I happened to be the easiest choice. I can't go back to that street. I don't want to go back to that coffee shop. But sometimes I catch myself thinking about how easy it was for her to erase me from reality in the eyes of everyone else. It's not a story about dating gone wrong. It's a story about how terrifyingly thin the line is between a normal person and someone who can manipulate a room with a whisper and a scream. And that's it. Nothing cinematic, nothing dramatic beyond the truth. Just a normal night, a normal date that turned into a trap I never saw coming. I don't think I'll ever meet someone like her again, and I don't want to. The thought of her is enough to make my stomach twist. I tell people it was a weird Tinder date, but I know the reality, the cold, sharp truth that she used me, made me into a criminal for a few hours, and walked away like nothing happened. I still dream about it sometimes. Not the screaming part, not the security, not even the cops. I dream about that quiet moment when she whispered in my ear, and I realized I wasn't the one in control at all. And honestly, that's worse than any horror movie because it's real. I thought I knew what a weird Tinder date could be, but this one hit a whole new level. I met him at this little bar near the river that looked more like a dive than a proper place to hang out. It had these dim neon lights and sticky tables, the kind of place that smells like spilled beer and old cigarette smoke no matter how much they clean. I got there first, ordered a soda, and tried to look casual, even though my stomach was twisting with the usual first date nerves. He walked in maybe 10 minutes later, smiling like he owned the place, which was a little off-putting, but I shrugged it off. We sat in the corner booth, and at first, it was normal small talk. His voice was easy to listen to, the kind that makes you nod along without thinking. We talked about college, work, random hobbies, music I pretended to know. But then, as the night stretched on, he started telling me stories about his ex. At first it seemed harmless, just a guy venting about a breakup. But then the stories got weirder. He mentioned how she disappeared one day, not like broke up, but literally gone. He laughed about it sometimes, like it was a joke, but there was this dark edge to his voice that made me lean back a little. He didn't just casually mention it either. He described her apartment, the things she left behind, how people reacted when she vanished. He went into little details that didn't make sense for someone just telling a story. Like he knew exactly what her fridge looked like or how her cat reacted. I told myself to stay calm, that he was probably just being dramatic, trying to impress me with a twisted sense of humor. But my instincts kept buzzing, that tiny voice in my head saying this isn't normal, not at all. The bar was getting emptier, late Thursday night vibes. I kept glancing around, trying to see if anyone else noticed how his stories were slowly creeping under my skin. He talked about the way she used to text him constantly, how she used to leave notes, and then the day she disappeared. He didn't go into detail about the police or anything official. Just stories, casual, like he was comfortable with it, like it was just another thing in his life. I started to make up excuses to leave, telling myself I could call an Uber, check my phone, anything. But every time I moved, he'd lean closer, talking about some detail I wasn't ready to hear. He mentioned how easy it would be to just vanish, how nobody really notices unless they're looking. At first I thought he was joking, but the way he said it, with that calm smile and casual shrug, made my chest tighten. The neon light caught his eyes, and I swear I could see that he actually imagined it, thinking about it. Eventually, I decided I had to get out. I told him I had to leave, that I had work in the morning, hoping he'd take the hint. Instead, he tilted his head and said something that stopped me cold. He asked if I thought people would notice if it happened again. I didn't answer, didn't even move, just stared at him like he had lost his mind. He leaned back, taking a sip of his drink, like he hadn't just dropped the most terrifying thing I could imagine onto the table between us. My heart was racing, my hands were shaking, and I felt every ounce of the room pressing down on me. I grabbed my bag, trying to act casual, trying to calm myself down, but I was seeing red flags everywhere. His eyes followed me, not in a normal way, but in a way that made my skin crawl. I got up, stumbled a little over the sticky floor, and told him I needed to go again. He nodded like it was fine, like nothing happened. But that question, that casual whisper about disappearing again, hung in the air. I didn't even look back as I stepped out into the cold night. The street was empty, except for a few drunk people stumbling past and the sound of water from the river hitting the docks. I walked fast, trying to shake off the feeling, trying to convince myself it was just some horrible joke. But my phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification from the Uber app showing the car I had booked, and I realized I was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Every shadow in the alley I passed looked like it could be him. Every passerby made me jump. I kept checking my reflection in store windows, imagining him following me, but of course, there was no one there. By the time I got home, I locked every door, checked the windows, even pulled the curtains tight. I kept picturing that little bar, that sticky table, the neon lights reflecting off his eyes as he casually said that line. I couldn't stop replaying it. I couldn't believe someone could talk about something like that, so casually, like it was just dinner conversation. The thought of him smiling as he asked if anyone would notice, like he had planned something, kept me awake for hours. The next day, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just messed up. Maybe he was a storyteller who went too far. I didn't want to tell anyone the details because it sounded insane. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't left, if I had sat there, nodding and laughing like I normally would. My stomach twisted every time I imagined that night stretching out, me trapped in that booth while he talked about disappearing people. I haven't swiped right since. I haven't even downloaded Tinder again. Every time I see someone new online, I think about him. I keep imagining that smile, that casual tone, the way he could drop the most horrifying thing into conversation like it was nothing. The city feels different now. Every alleyway I walk past, every darkened street corner, I imagine him standing there, waiting to see if anyone would notice if I disappeared. I still dream about it sometimes. Not nightmares with loud sounds or monsters, just a quiet, terrifying calm of him leaning back in that booth, talking about his ex, and then looking at me like he's testing me. I can't get that out of my head. The normal part of dating, the easy laughs and casual drinks, feels tainted. Everything that once felt safe now has that undercurrent of tension. I don't know what happened to his ex. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's terrible. Maybe I don't even want to know. All I know is that night changed the way I see people. The idea that someone could casually drop something that horrifying and not think twice about it, that someone could imagine it as a game, makes me question everything about how much I trust strangers. I keep telling myself it was a weird date, a bad Tinder story. But deep down, I know it wasn't just a story. It was real, it was horrifying, and I came dangerously close to being a part of it. I don't tell anyone the full truth because it sounds insane, but I remember that question he asked me as I left. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was casual, like asking if I wanted a refill, and I can't stop hearing it in my head. I thought I was just meeting someone new from Tinder for a casual night out, but it turned into one of the weirdest and creepiest nights of my life. I matched with her because she had this chaotic energy in her pictures, messy hair, neon jackets, lots of selfies in random spots around the city. She messaged first, light jokes, nothing creepy. We agreed to meet, or at least I thought we did. That night, I got dressed up a little, nothing fancy, just trying to look decent, and headed to the spot she said. And the messages started coming in fast. Not "I'm here" or "meet me at the corner," but strange instructions. First it was walk toward the bus stop, stand by the lamppost, turn around. I figured maybe she was trying to be playful, like a scavenger hunt kind of thing. I walked text by text, each one telling me where to go, when to stop, what to look at. I told myself it was weird but kind of fun, like I was part of some urban adventure. After 20 minutes, I realized I hadn't actually seen her once. She was giving directions that led me through alleys, side streets, and past buildings I had never noticed before, places I wouldn't normally wander alone at night. My gut started to tense, but I kept telling myself I'd see her soon. She had to be just ahead, maybe hiding, waiting to surprise me. Then she started giving instructions that didn't make sense. Look behind the dumpster, check the bench, count the number of windows on the old brick building. I laughed nervously to myself, realizing I didn't know where this was going, but part of me didn't want to stop. The air smelled damp, like rain from earlier, and the streets were quiet. No cars, almost no people. It was the kind of empty that makes your footsteps echo and your heart thump too loudly. Finally, the instructions led me to a parking lot, cracked asphalt, streetlights buzzing overhead. I was expecting her to appear any second, maybe laughing, stepping out from behind a car. Instead, she told me to open the trunk of a nearby black sedan parked alone in the far corner. My stomach sank. This felt off, way off. But she'd been giving instructions all night, and something stupid in my head told me maybe this was part of her idea of a joke. I walked to the car, my hand shaking slightly, and popped the trunk. Inside was a small phone, screen facing up, buzzing lightly. I picked it up, my heart in my throat, and saw the recording had already started. It was video, and it had been recording me the entire night. Every step, every turn, every strange little laugh or nervous glance at a dark alley, all caught on camera. I dropped the phone back into the trunk for a second, my mind racing. Someone had been following me. All night, my fingers were cold, my chest tight. I thought about turning around, running, calling someone, but I didn't move. I couldn't. The recording showed exactly where I had gone, how I followed the instructions without questioning them, how easily I had walked through the city alone, thinking it was just a game. I started seeing patterns, like the camera angles were perfect, placed so she could capture every reaction I had, every little motion. My stomach was twisted, adrenaline taking over. I felt foolish, terrified, and trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I checked the phone again, scrolling through, and realized she had even edited timestamps. Every little detail matched the night perfectly, but in a way that suggested planning, precision. She had been thinking about this for a while, laying out each step, each instruction, maybe even waiting for me to arrive at the exact time. It wasn't just creepy, it was calculated. My mind kept running through questions. The only answer I could find was that she had been orchestrating this, leading me willingly, step by step, into her trap. The parking lot felt colder now, darker somehow. The streetlights flickered above, casting shadows that looked alive. I tried to call her, text her, anything, but she didn't respond. I felt every passing second stretch out, imagining her somewhere close, laughing at the way I followed instructions like a puppet. The realization hit that I had given her every location I had walked, every stop I had made, all of it documented. Eventually, I put the phone back in the trunk and stepped back, trying to get control of myself. My hands were shaking too badly to lock the car or even think straight. I kept looking around, expecting her to step out from behind a car, a tree, the edge of the parking lot, but she didn't. I didn't want to stay another second. I ran to the edge of the lot, my shoes scraping against gravel, and finally got my bearings enough to call an Uber. While waiting, I realized the true scope of what happened. She had manipulated me, controlled me, and had evidence of it all. Every alley, every lamppost, every obscure instruction, captured and preserved. My head spun thinking about how careful she must have been to not be seen while placing cameras or recording devices along the way, or maybe she had another way of tracking me I didn't even want to imagine. I sat there trembling, staring at the darkened cars, wondering if I had just been part of some sick experiment, or if she was just playing a game she had been planning for months. The Uber ride home felt like the longest trip I had ever taken. I kept replaying every instruction, every pause, every time I had checked a window or glanced behind a dumpster, thinking maybe I missed something important. Once I got inside my apartment, I double-locked the doors, checked every window, unplugged every device that could be a camera, my imagination running wild. I couldn't stop thinking about the trunk, the phone, the footage. Days later, I still can't shake the feeling of being followed. I haven't swiped on Tinder since. Every time my phone buzzes, I check nervously, imagining it's her sending instructions again. I know she probably doesn't even need to, that she already has everything she wants from that night. The image of the recording playing my entire evening is burned into my memory. I haven't told anyone the full story. Not really, because it sounds insane. I just say weird things happened with a Tinder date, and people nod politely. But inside, I remember every step she made me take, every direction, the way I trusted her, and how easily I was manipulated. I can still picture the black car, trunk open, the phone buzzing at me as if it were alive, recording me like a specimen in some experiment. The scariest part isn't that she could do it, isn't even that she watched me all night. It's that she could have done it again, anywhere, anytime, and I wouldn't have known. And the fact that I actually followed her instructions, without hesitation, makes me realize how easy it would have been for her to lead me into something far worse. I haven't gone out the same way since. I avoid streets that are empty at night. I avoid strange instructions from strangers. I avoid trusting someone I meet online. Every time I see a black sedan parked on the street, my chest tightens. Every time I hear a phone buzz with a notification, my stomach drops. That night changed the way I walk through the city, the way I think about strangers, and the way I imagine ordinary places can hide extraordinary danger. Even now, I keep thinking about that trunk, the phone inside, the recording of me moving like a puppet through the city. I keep imagining her somewhere, maybe smiling at the memory of how easy it was to manipulate me. And that's all there is to it. No dramatic chase, no final confrontation. Just a night that turned into evidence I didn't know I was creating, and a fear that I might still be tracked without realizing it. I thought it was going to be a normal Friday night. I swiped right on him because his profile was full of casual selfies, travel pictures, and a few jokes that actually made me laugh. We started chatting, the kind of conversation that feels effortless, like you've known each other for months, not minutes. He suggested meeting up at a small rooftop bar that had a view of the skyline. I agreed because it sounded chill, low pressure, and honestly, I had nothing better to do. When I got there, he was already waiting near the railing, sipping a drink. He looked exactly like his pictures, maybe even better. His smile was easy, his laugh contagious, and for the first hour, everything felt completely normal. We talked about stupid things, about our favorite shows, the worst jobs we ever had, dumb college stories. I kept glancing over the edge of the building, checking out the city lights, feeling the breeze, feeling surprisingly relaxed for a Tinder date. He suggested grabbing a bite to eat at this tiny diner a few blocks over. The streets were busy, cars honking, people walking their dogs, the whole city alive at night. We shared a couple of plates, still laughing, still joking, and I thought maybe this could actually be a good night. Nothing felt off. At least, not until I got home. I plopped onto my bed and picked up my phone to check Tinder again. I wanted to make sure he hadn't unmatched me already. Nothing serious, just casual curiosity. That's when my stomach dropped. His profile was gone. Not just gone, but replaced. There was a new profile using my photos, my name, everything. It looked exactly like me, as if someone had copied me completely. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, my fingers trembling. I opened the app, logged out, logged back in, refreshed. Nothing changed. I tried to convince myself it was some weird glitch. I scrolled through the app, checking for other signs, thinking maybe I had imagined it, but it was real. Someone had made a profile using my pictures and my name. My brain went straight into panic mode. How did they get my pictures? We had only just met tonight. I hadn't even posted anything new online in weeks. And why would he do this? Was it him? Could it be him? I remembered the diner, the rooftop, all the places we had been. I tried replaying the evening in my head. Nothing had seemed off. He had been funny, polite, engaging. He had joked about silly things, paid for the food without any fuss. Nothing about the night screamed danger. But now, looking at that fake profile, I realized how easy it could have been for him to screenshot, snap pictures while I wasn't looking, somehow collect enough to make this copy of me online. I tried calling him. Nothing. No response. I tried texting, the same. Every little notification made my chest tighten. I kept checking the profile, hoping maybe it would disappear, hoping it was just temporary, a glitch. But it wasn't. It stayed there mocking me with my own face, my own name, doing whatever people did on Tinder profiles. Swiping, matching, chatting. I had no idea who it was talking to, what it was doing, but I couldn't stop staring. Sleep didn't come that night. I kept imagining him, sitting somewhere smiling while creating this copy of me, playing some stick game. I replayed every part of the evening, thinking about when I took pictures of the skyline, when I laughed at a joke, when I adjusted my hair, wondering if those moments were being captured without me knowing. It was like the normal night had been a setup, everything perfectly arranged so he could get what he wanted. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started digging. I tried searching for the profile outside of Tinder, checking any links, any forums, any hints that might tell me who was behind it. I couldn't find anything concrete. Every step I took seemed to feed the panic more. I thought about all the times I had taken selfies, all the times I had posted something online, but nothing explained how this profile mirrored me so perfectly in real time, created just tonight. I went back to the places we had been, pretending it was casual, just wandering the city. I looked for cameras, for people, for signs that someone had been following us or watching. Everything looked normal. The streets were alive, the diner buzzing with morning traffic, the rooftop empty and quiet. It was like the city itself had swallowed him and the profile, leaving me with nothing but this gnawing fear. I considered deleting all my accounts, changing my photos, my usernames, everything, but the thought of it didn't even feel like it would help. Whoever did this already had me. Whoever he was, he had made a copy of me, my face, my name, and maybe my personality too, in this app that I relied on in this world I used to casually explore. It wasn't about dating anymore, it was about control, about ownership. I felt violated in a way I couldn't describe. I started noticing little things, tiny echoes of the night everywhere. Someone walking a few steps behind me, a car parked too long outside my apartment, notifications on my phone from unknown numbers. I kept thinking it had to be him, some part of him still lingering, watching, maybe even messaging through the fake profile. Every buzz made me jump, every shadow made me flinch. The city didn't feel safe, not at night, not in the day. I tried to tell a friend about it, but it sounded insane. I didn't mention the profile at first, just said I had a weird Tinder date. They laughed, said people were strange online, and I nodded, knowing they had no idea what I meant. I couldn't show them the profile. Seeing it made me want to curl up, made me feel exposed, like someone had stolen a part of me and put it on display for anyone to see. Days passed. The profile didn't change. He didn't reach out, at least not directly. I felt like I was being watched, like my image had been captured in some parallel version of reality where he controlled everything. I couldn't log in without seeing it, couldn't look at my own pictures without thinking someone else was using them, twisting them, existing in a space that should have been mine. I stopped going out at night. I stopped posting online. I deleted pictures, even old ones that had nothing to do with him. I thought maybe it would make a difference, but it didn't. The copy existed, perfect, untouched, and I couldn't do anything to remove it. It was like he had built a shadow version of me, one that I had no access to, no control over. Weeks later, I realized the scariest part wasn't even him, not entirely. It was that he had created a version of me that could live and move through the world without my consent. It was proof that the perfect date, the charming guy with the jokes and the skyline view, had been a facade, a mask to collect me, piece by piece, without me noticing. And it worked so well that I only realized it after the night was over, after I had gone home thinking it was normal. I still check Tinder sometimes, even though I know I shouldn't. I keep looking to see if the profile changes, if he posts something new, if anyone notices the copy. It doesn't help. It's there, always there, a constant reminder of how easy it is for someone to manipulate a normal evening, a casual meeting, into something terrifying. My image, my name, my presence in a digital world I can't access, but he can, and that's enough to make me feel trapped. I've stopped going on dates entirely. I stopped trusting anyone new online. Every notification makes me anxious. Every new match makes my stomach drop. The perfect evening, the rooftop, the diner, the skyline. It all feels like a trap now, a setup for something I didn't even know could happen. And the copy of me? It's still there, still perfect, still living some version of my life that I can't touch. The night started simple, casual, normal. It ended with me staring at a screen, seeing myself replaced, and realizing that someone else had taken pieces of me, stitched them together, and made a version of me that exists without my consent. And there's no way to undo it, no way to erase it, no way to confront the person who did it because they're already gone, leaving only the ghost of me in a profile I never wanted to exist.